Number 10. Elizabeth I. Good old Queen Bess is one of the most remembered queens in the British monarchy, male or female. She's a pretty big deal. Elizabeth loved to make her fellow male nobles fall under her spell. She was witty, cunning, and very well liked by her court. However, one of the things that earned her some enemies was establishing a Protestant England. Her sister Mary, her predecessor, fought very hard for the opposite. She was very Catholic, and we will get to how bloody that was later, but Queen Bess a lot of people off, especially Spain. She was supposed to marry the Catholic Spanish king after her sister passed, but she turned him down. This led to a conflict between Protestant England and Catholic Spain, but her navy defeated the Spanish Armada in 1588. Mary, Queen of Scots, laid claim to the English throne and was one of Lizzie's greatest internal threats. Mary was a Catholic, which made all the Catholics of England back her. Mary was also presumed to be behind several assassination attempts against the Queen. Finally, Queen Elizabeth had to take action, and after keeping her cousin hostage for 20 years, she finally had to have her executed. And we'll talk more about her later. Number 9. Catherine the Great. So Catherine the Great was called the Great for a reason. She was a pretty epic woman by most accounts. She even had one of the first vaccines, which is pretty crazy. Though she wasn't actually born in Russia or even Russian at all, Catherine was not content to go down in history quietly. She considered herself an enlightened ruler, and history tends to agree, with aims of prioritizing education for the people. She had many lovers, and there is enough evidence to suggest that the son she had was illegitimate. Peter III of Russia was hardly the man Catherine intended on marrying, and later planned a coup against him, which resulted in her position of power. However, the coup did turn bloody when on July 17th, Peter died under mysterious circumstances. There isn't proof that she was directly involved or even knew about it, but it cast a dark shadow over her reign for the rest of the time. Number 8. Grace O'Malley. We've got enough traditional royalty on this list that we definitely need to spice it up. Enter Grace O'Malley, the Pirate Queen of Ireland. Pirate Queen! What a title. Definitely considered unholy behavior, Grace abandoned the traditions of women of the time and fled to the sea. There, she took on the waves and perils of Davy Jones' locker with a legendary ferocity. She was born into the clan O'Malley around 1530, around the time of Henry VIII's rule over England and Ireland. Clan O'Malley was a notorious seafaring clan and ruled the southern shore of Clew Bay, Achilleland, and most of the barony of Murrisk for over 300 years. Grace was really well educated and could even converse fully in Latin, Spanish, Scottish, Gaelic, and French. She was not one to be refused, and after spending years fighting the British, she finally met Queen Bess, and not only did she speak Latin to her, but she refused to bow, as she was considered a queen herself by that point. Number 7. Mary, Queen of Scots. I told you I was gonna bring her up. A name you will recognize, as I've already mentioned her before, but in terms of who the villain in that story is, it depends on which side you're telling the story on. Mary's story is full of tragedy, romance, betrayal, loss, and heartbreak. Unlike Lizzie, Mary was a dedicated Catholic and spent the entirety of her reign trying to gather the Catholics against Elizabeth. She had a series of marriages and relationships that led to tragedy every which way she went. Her first husband, the Dauphin of France, died shortly after their marriage. Her second husband she loved until he became a drunkard, and then she just started running things. But he was mysteriously unalived while she was 6 months pregnant. He was inside a building that exploded, but his body landed outside, and it turned out he was strangled. So what happened there? She would later give birth to 2 stillborn sons, but she would have sons later on. She would have a son who would inherit the throne after Elizabeth's death, but it was due to Mary's plotting and scheming that eventually ended her in death. So she did actually plot to kill Elizabeth. So that's a pretty unholy deed, I would say. Number 6. Princess Olga of Kiev. Okay, wow, this woman. One saint you definitely don't want to mess with. Despite being a saint, Princess Olga of Kiev was actually pretty sinful. She was one of the most vicious and vengeful rulers in the history of Kievan Rus, which would later become Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. Olga took center stage after her husband died and made sure she would never be forgotten. Her husband died in a very gruesome way by the enemies that we're going to talk about in a second. When the people who viciously unalived her husband tried to persuade her to marry their leader, they sent 20 men. Olga told them to wait in their boats, had her men dig a ditch in the meantime, and the next morning buried the men alive. She then lied and told the king she would accept his offer if he sent his best company to retrieve her. He didn't know about all that stuff yet. When they got there, she locked them in a bathhouse and torched it. But it didn't stop there. Olga didn't stop there, that's not her style. She would later host a steak dinner with her enemies in which they were staked. Very Vlad the Impaler, I know. Then she set whole villages on fire by attaching sulfur to pigeons, and then it was just crazy. Damn, like hell has no fury like a woman scorned, let me tell you. Number 5, Queen Isabella I. The Spanish Inquisition, pretty high up there as far as terrifying points in history go. If you weren't willing to convert to Catholicism, you were tormented, interrogated, and burned at the stake. Who was behind this awful time in history? This lady, Queen Isabella I. Technically, as she was fighting for a holy order for the Catholic Church, this can be seen as holy, but was it? Burning people at the stake because they didn't share this belief? Not cool, Isabel. She created a secular government through her reign which allowed for the monarchy to have more power. Being a pious Catholic, she made Catholicism the official religion and created a tribunal to make this happen. Secret service or a secret police that spread fear wherever they went. Her direct influence caused the Jewish population to falter for a really long time after. Number 4, Fridegund of Soissons. Okay, I maybe said that wrong, so I apologize. Kind of impressed with her rise to power. She went from slave attendant to queen. How do you bridge that gap? No idea. Boy was she ferocious. Assassination and manipulation were her main political tools. Fridegund was among a small number of enslaved women in the Merovingian household that became a queen. Merovingian was the OG Central Europe before everything got split up. She survived political dangers and retained her husband's loyalty and could persuade monks and priests to jump onto her plots with ease. She encouraged her husband, the king, to set aside his first wife and then even take the life of his second. But his second wife, Galswinda, had a sister named Brunhild who became the mortal enemy of Fridegund. She had good reason to be. Fridegund continued to do everything she could to secure her position, one assassination after the next. She was a pretty stormy lady. Number 3, Bathory. Okay. Alright, technically not a queen, I get it, but she might as well have been with the power that she had. So fight me. She's remembered as the most evil woman in the world in history, I think. I don't know. That's my opinion. Bathory was the stuff of nightmares. Elizabeth Bathory was born on August 7, 1560 into a prominent Hungarian noble family, making her practically untouchable. She married a very famous war hero who is suspected of gifting Bloody Lizzie with the skills she used to kill. After she died, Bathory became obsessed with immortality. Supposedly when one of her servants accidentally spilt blood on her and her skin appeared younger after. Bathory then began her mission of horror, luring over 650 young virgin women to her palace and brutally taking their lives. She was even bold enough to lure daughters of nobility. Before draining them of their blood, she would make them suffer in ways you don't even want to imagine before bathing in the blood itself. When she was finally caught, 3 of her servants were executed, but she was simply locked away in her tower for the rest of her days on house arrest. Ugh. Number 2, Catherine de Medici, also known as the Serpent Queen. History colors her story as the tale of the evil queen. On one hand, she is remembered for being one of the most powerful French queens in history, and then on the other, she was blamed for the many atrocities that took place during her reign. Her regency was marked by the French wars of religion and the many games Catherine played within them. The Catholics and the Protestants, as previously mentioned, were at war, and she spent a lot of time trying to find peace. Kind of. But she was a passionate Catholic and is believed to have tried to remove a Protestant general from her son's side. When he survived the attack, she lied and convinced her son that the Protestants were responsible, so she scapegoated them. So he authorized taking the lives of their leaders. Enter St. Bartholomew's Massacre. Catherine implicated the general, which resulted in him being the first to be beaten and then tossed out of his own bedroom window. An estimated 3,000 French Protestants were taken out in Paris, but the total countrywide was around 70,000. And last but not least, Bloody Mary, actually known as Queen Mary I of England, so no, I'm not talking about the girl you say in the mirror 3 times so that she appears and you're like, wow, I'm haunted forever. Queen Mary became known as Bloody Mary due to her vicious tirade against Protestants in England during her reign. She even imprisoned her own sister, Elizabeth, who we mentioned at the beginning of this list, due to suspicions of treason. This was unfounded. She bore her father Henry VIII ill will after the stuff he pulled with the church and after having delegitimized her as his heir for a time. After Mary took the throne and married the Catholic King of Spain, she began carrying out her plan for England to become Catholic once again. In 1555, she revived England's heresy laws and began burning offenders at the stake, starting with her father's longtime advisor, Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury. She burned over 300 convicted heretics, most of them being common citizens, and dozens more died in prison, hence giving her the name of Bloody Mary.
Not so British after all. If you're like me, then you're most likely not gonna be royalty. Although being a prince would be pretty cool, I just don't have the pure bloodline to be royalty, but neither does the Queen of England. When you think of old Blighty and her royal throne, you think of pure British descent, but you'd be wrong. The House of Windsor is actually Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, which, if you couldn't tell, doesn't exactly scream tea and crumpets. The German-sounding name became an issue in the early 20th century due to the First World War breaking out against two-time war loser Germany. Britain needing to inspire its citizens to defeat Germany, which at the time it was really anyone's game, so to help inspire the people, King George V changed the name to Windsor. After all, it's kinda difficult to fight someone when you have more in common than differences. Not to mention that there were a lot of Germanic influences around, so really, it was a bad look and a great marketing decision.
At number 9, Charles the Tampon? Yeah, we're getting weird. Relationships are kind of weird. I mean, they can be great, don't get me wrong, but they have a weird side too. Every couple is different and they have their thing. Some have a show that they like to watch together, others have their songs, and some have little sayings that they've come up with. But those are the more tame quirks that some couples have. Others, however, can get very bizarre, but many of them probably can't add up to the strange things that have been said between Prince Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles. As we all know, Prince Charles was first married to Princess Diana, and it's no secret that they had a pretty tough relationship. Theirs was certainly not a happy marriage, and they each had their own affairs with other people while they were married. During their marriage, Charles was still pretty hung up on Camilla, the woman he was told he couldn't have, and who was also married to someone else. This minor obstacle, however, didn't stop them from getting freaky, at least over the phone. In 1992, the year that Charles and Diana announced their separation, a steamy phone conversation between Charles and Camilla was leaked, and it was super weird. In the call, Charles was simping like no other, saying things like how he wished he could live in Camilla's pants as a pair of panties, and even expressed his desire to be Camilla's tampon. Like, what? Charles, stop it. Ew. This leak became a scandal called Tampon Gate, and as you can imagine, this wasn't good for the royals. But I guess it still kind of worked out for Charles, since after all that he finally got the girl he wanted and perhaps got to live out his dream of being a box of Tampax or something. I don't know. I really don't want that mental image. Moving on.
Number 8. Comrade Cousin? King George V and Tsar Nicholas II were rulers of vast empires in the early 20th century. You'd think the similarities between these two monarchs end there, but in reality, these two royal men were much closer than the public thought. Georgie and Nikki were first cousins. That's right, first cousins. Even though their respected empires were culturally different and separated by hundreds of miles, the two men were immediate family. Looking at images of the royals together doesn't require a DNA test to understand that they're related. They look identical and could easily be mistaken for twins. Unfortunately for Nicholas, when the Russian Revolution was in full swing, the Romanov family went into isolation after Nicholas abdicated his throne. While there were attempts to thwart the coup. Nikki's cousin wasn't the best aid. Just goes to show you that sometimes you can't rely on a guy who looks exactly like you because royalty has pretty messed up bloodlines.
At number 7, killer date. What is the worst date that you've ever been on? What kinds of weird people have you met through your dating history? I'm sure there are some pretty wild and crazy stories out there, but I'm guessing that very few of them would even come close to the insane dating story from Princess Beatrice and how she literally dated a killer. In 2006, when Princess Beatrice was 17 years old, she got into a relationship with an American playboy named Paolo Luzzo. Paolo was an arguably shady guy, judging by the fact that he was arrested on a manslaughter charge before getting with Beatrice. Paolo was accused of ending the life of 19-year-old Jonathan Duchalier after beating the guy to death. Yeah, what a catch, right? Shockingly, Paolo's charges were reduced to a less severe charge, and he still got to date a princess after all of this. He even broke his probation to go on a trip to the French Alps with Princess Beatrice. How he finessed life so hard, I have no idea, but either way, their relationship only lasted a short amount of time. I can't say it's a good look for a member of the royal family to be seen with someone with such a dark past.
Number 6. The Princess. The tragic loss of Princess Diana affected not only the UK but people around the globe. She was known for her courage and her willingness to help those in need, and had the nerve to speak her mind. Her shocking demise isn't met without controversy. In fact, it may be the biggest controversy of the royal family. There is some evidence that points in the direction that the royal family was behind her death. Diana had proclaimed to her guards that her car was having issues, and even stated in a private letter to her butler that she had some reasonable fear that her life was in danger. In a nutshell, the royal family disapproved of the princess's new lover, even though Charles had clearly been up to no good himself. So in order for Charles to remarry and stop the gutter storm in the tabloids that Diana was going to create, they maybe sort of organized the accident that did end her life. Well, good thing that's over, and after this, there won't be any more controversy for the family, right?
At number 5, sucking toes. The British royal family are considered celebrities. I mean, with the amount of time people spend obsessing about their every move, I'd say that they're 10 times more famous than the Kardashians. They don't need their own reality show for people to keep up with them. People just do it. With this obsession with the royals, obviously comes paparazzi trying to get the latest scoop on members of the family and what they do in their spare time, as well as who they're canoodling with. This was how Sarah Ferguson was exposed for seeing other men shortly after she and Prince Andrew separated. Sarah was photographed topless on a beach with a man named John Bryan, and it could have just been a juicy story by itself, but things got weird when pictures were published showing the man sucking on Sarah's toes. This again wasn't a good look for the royals, and the queen was pretty mad about the whole situation, but I'd like to look at the bright side of this. Think that this John Bryan guy had a pretty good time throughout all this. I mean, he got to suck royal toes and be published in the newspaper. Sounds like a pretty lit time for him.
Number 4, party time. British royals are people of high esteem, morals, and cut from a higher quality of cloth. So when members of the royal family are seen partying too hard, well, it's a bad look. Prince George, Duke of Kent, was one such royal. He became known for spending his evenings in the best hotels and ballrooms that money could buy, even sometimes wandering into venues that were a tad tawdry even by today's standards. What's more interesting than that is the prince living the life of a frat boy is that his promiscuous relationship with not only just women, but men as well. Add in substance abuse issues that would make Charlie Sheen blush, and you've got yourself one wild prince. Yet again, there's some private letters that seem to support such wild accusations. Unfortunately, he passed away in a plane crash that is shrouded in mystery, and the royal family is suspected of having a hand. Foreshadowing much?
At number 3, the milkman's son. By far the most scandalous royal relationship of modern times was without a doubt Prince Charles and Princess Diana's marriage. We all know how messy their relationship was with the love triangle, the affairs, and Diana's confessions of how tough it was to be married to Charles. But one of the other pretty juicy secret scandals that surrounded the couple was the speculation that the couple's youngest son, Prince Harry, wasn't even Prince Charles's biological kid. In a tell-all interview with Princess Diana in 1995, she admitted to having had a 5-year-long affair with a military man named James Hewitt. After Diana's passing, people started speculating that perhaps this James character was actually Harry's biological dad. I mean, when you take a side-by-side look at James and Harry, their resemblance is pretty uncanny. James denied all allegations, and the royal family did the same, but this still remains one of those royal secrets that I'm sure everyone believes but just won't admit.
Number 2, stepbro? Yeah, I know it's gross, but the truth of the matter is none of us would be here if it wasn't for a little inbreeding. Royals just tend to turn that dial up to 11. Back in ye olde times, bloodlines had to be maintained, and the only way to keep them pure was to marry cousins and have children. Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip are both related to Queen Victoria, but the crazy bus doesn't stop here. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert were first cousins, and they had 9 children together. This is a tradition that all royal families practice. Of course, marriage back then was more of a business decision or a political one. It's why certain distant cousins end up ruling different monarchies and empires. Sure, I get it. Why cross the street when you can cross the hall? But at some point, you gotta run out of cousins. Let's just be glad this practice is of the past and stays in the past.
At number 1, long lost family. The royal family is known for trying to make themselves look perfect in the eyes of the public. They are always trying to look poised and put together and without flaws, but this effort also comes with its dark side, and there's a dark royal secret that just shows the lengths that they have gone to make people think that they are all just perfect people of society. It turns out that the queen had secret cousins that very few people knew about. The royal family and everyone adjacent are very well-known people, so how did we not know know about the Queen's cousins? Well, that's because they were essentially shunned and shipped off elsewhere because of their mental states. Back in the 1940s, mental disabilities were not very understood and were often seen as embarrassing for the families of the people who had whatever disability. The royal family thought that these cousins, Nerissa and Catherine, were too embarrassing for the royal family to keep around, so they had them incarcerated in a mental institution and they remained there for the rest of their lives, cut off from the rest of the royal family. It is said that no members of the family ever came to visit them. Now that is not a way to treat family.
Kicking off our list at number 10, Princess Diana. We'll start with a tragedy right off the gate. Here we go. Prince Charles, the oldest son of the Queen, he straight up admitted to having an affair with Camilla right before his divorce from his first wife, Princess Diana. So, in turn, Princess Diana addressed that relationship and what exactly happened. During that famous 1995 interview with BBC, she couldn't have said it better if I'm being honest myself. Diana said, very confidently, "Well, there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded." That's a Princess Diana roast, folks. Oh no! Yeah, Princess Diana, she's full of roasts apparently. Diana also said she was in love with riding instructor Major James Hewitt during her marriage to Charles, so everybody was a little busy, it seemed, and rightfully so. Diana's like, yeah, I'm not hanging out with this guy. Diana and Charles divorced in 1996, only a year before her tragic accident took her life. Later in 2005, he married Camilla. Yeah, has anybody seen Spencer? Kristen Stewart looks great in that movie, and I want to know if it's worth the watch. Comment down below. Number 9, the Great Fire. One of the most wild Nostradamus predictions of all time. It reads, "The blood of the just will commit a fault at London, burnt through lightning of 23's the 6th. The ancient lady will fall from her high place, several of the same sect will be killed." Now, there are of course many people who believe that this entry here was actually one that predicted the Great Fire of London that occurred in 1666. The line 23's the 6th and times 20 by 3, and then you add 6, you get 66. Right? Quick math. But most importantly, it may also mention London and the royal family. And in real life, this fire did affect them as well. Also, it is said by many that the reference to the lady here is another term for the kingdom, the lady. This means that Nostradamus was predicting, maybe, that the kingdom was going to fall as a result of the Great Fire. So, yeah, he kind of nailed it. I don't know. Number 8, King James. Not to be confused with LeBron James, although he's a pretty good king as well. He's alright, that fellow. This is a different king. In an official 16th century medical book, the actual medical advice at one point was to not bathe. Don't do it or else you're a sinner, I guess. Use not baths or stews, nor sweat too much, for all openeth of the pores of a man's body, and maketh the venomous air to enter, and for to infect the blood. First of all, what? What did you just say? Why is every shred of medical knowledge from the past always written in riddles like it's a Harry Potter spell? You know what I mean? God forbid you have bronchitis in the 16th century. A doctor is like, yes, just a flower petal, we'll fix that. Doctor with one of these comes in? No way, not listening to that guy. They thought that taking a bath would make you sick, so King James IV, apparently he never took a bath. And his hygiene was so bad that he would sometimes pass on lice to others just by walking by them. He would walk by and they'd be like, "Gah." Guy's got Steven Tyler's hair. What is that? Like, can we cut it if it's infected with gross? Can we just, maybe a bald king? How does a bald king sound? Number 7, King Rudolph II. The Holy Roman Emperor from 1552. He was known as a collector of sorts. These royals, they like to collect things. They like to spend their money on weird things. Some princes collect stamps, others collect zoo animals. See, his castle was home to lions, tigers, and orangutans, so good luck getting a full 8 hours of sleep, my friends. He also collected human artifacts, this royal, so that's a bit odd to collect when you're a royal. Imagine having company over, you're like, yeah, watch the lion crap, and also don't mind the jars of eyes. Do you want a drink? Let me get you a drink. King Rudolph II, okay, he's quite important in history, obviously. He supported the scientific revolution a lot, and he also poured tons of money into astrology, so he was into cool stuff. Number 6, Prince Harry costume party. YouTube doesn't like when I say some words, specifically a word that rhymes with Yahtzee. But with this being one of the biggest scandals, I have to bring it up, I have to mention it. The Duke was also referred to as a bad boy, but just how deep did these incidents cut? Was he like topless on a beach and he's bad, or was he dressed up as something horrible at a Halloween party? It was the latter. Before he settled down with Meghan in 2018, Harry had to issue a public apology in 2005 because, whoops, somebody got photos from that party. Did the royal dress up as the Beast from Beauty and the Beast? No. Did he dress up like a witch? No, it would have been fun, but no. Photos leaked of him wearing a World War II German soldier outfit. Can't say much here, but it was even equipped with a specific armband. Yeah, we can't show you either, but you get what I'm saying. This was a not great time. It was poor taste. He could have dressed up in any way. He's a royal, and he does this instead. I don't know, it's very off-putting. Harry said afterwards, quote, "I am very sorry if I caused any offense or embarrassment to anyone," end quote. Wow, he really meant that one. Really came from the heart, that apology. It was a poor choice of costume, and I apologize, he says. Okay, number 5, King Henry II. This is a quote that people believe was Nostradamus predicting the death of King Henry II, who actually was a personal acquaintance of the prophet himself. That'd be scary. Hey, how do I tell you this? While at one point Nostradamus was seen addressing King Henry II as the most invincible Henry, King of France, unfortunately Henry proved to be quite vincible when he met his gruesome death at the age of 40. In the summer of 1559, a terrible jousting accident went awry and it left the king passing away shortly after from sepsis. This is a terrible story, but I told you it because many think that Nostradamus predicted this. The jousting incident saw the king having splinters driven into his eye and his skull by one of his young soldiers. And the Nostradamus quote reads, "The young lion will overcome the older one." Yeah, he's jousting and then the eye, and then it happened. That sucks. Number 4, Prince Charles the Vampire. Now, some of these theories, yeah, they're a bit out there. I didn't make them up. I wish I did, but I didn't. Some believers out there actually think Prince Charles is a vampire, a blood-sucking, flying, turning into a bat-looking vampire. I don't know. Why? Because Prince Charles is related to Vlad the Impaler. You know, that 15th century ruler who inspired the story of Dracula in Transylvania, who we're all pretty sure was a vampire. Now, it's a fun theory that went about, but Prince Charles having a piece of Romania is definitely helping out this case. We kind of believe this. The prince has been conserving forests and he even got property over there, so maybe he's a vampire, maybe not. Maybe he just likes property and castles. And Vlad the Impaler. I heard he's a great lad. A great Vlad. Number 3, shapeshifters. Awesome. I'm not actually Taylor, I'm someone else pretending to be. That's cool. That's why I'm so energetic today. This next theory I wish I could claim for my own again, but it was actually former BBC presenter David Icke. He takes the cake himself. Here we go. He has since revealed himself as a conspiracy theorist, and one that surrounds the royal family had me stunned. Icke and quite a few others claim that the royal family is part of the Illuminati. Yeah, and then all of them earn their power because their human ancestor mated with reptilian aliens. They were clapping alien reptilians. That's how they became royals. That's the trick. You gotta clap some reptilian alien. David says the theory actually explains why royal families are obsessed with keeping their bloodlines clean with other royals. And you know, incest. But the biggest what the part of all this has to be when David told the public that he knows people who have seen royal family members change into reptiles and then back into human form again. Number 2, leaked letters. We'll end with some recent leaked letters. We love those. We love some gossip. We mentioned Princess Diana. Well, we've got more stuff. We've got more tea. In May 2018, the royal wedding, it was thought at the time that Meghan's father was absent because of a heart attack that he suffered days before. But a year or so later, it's revealed that Thomas Markle and the new Duchess weren't as close. There was some drama. There was some beef going on in the family. Thomas spoke out against his own daughter. There was a scandal where Meghan spoke to Oprah, the tell-all that we all watched, and Meghan actually said to her father that if you tell me the truth about what happened, about working with paparazzi, then we can help and get through it. But he wasn't able to do that, and that for me has really resonated. Yeah, if my dad was working with paparazzi, showing them private letters as well, just for clout, I'd be upset too. As if my dad can't even open his iPad without me, let alone leak my letters. Number 1, personal sheet changer. I can't tell if this is the worst thing ever or the best, but it's kept me laughing for months now. Royals have been sweating constantly about other people trying to, you know, take them out, right? It's a scary job. Everyone wants to attack you. I mentioned Boyd Jones on here a few times, that guy that stalked the Queen. It's terrifying. People are terrifying. Boyd Jones would go through the Queen's drawers and, you know, big ooh. So historically, the royal family would try their best to anticipate any and all attacks. Be as safe as you can be, right? Of course. Like the kissing sheets, for example. Oh, have you heard about these kissing sheets, this royal position? A great deal of monarchs hired taste testers to make sure nobody poisoned them, that's normal. But they also had a guy who would get tucked in the king's sheets. I would much rather have the latter, know what I mean? King Henry VIII hired somebody to make sure the bed wasn't poisoned. So you were required to make the king's bed every morning, but you also had to rub all the sheets down everywhere before bedtime. You'd have to kiss the bed sheets to make sure they weren't poisoned. Yeah, sleep tight. I'll sleep here, boss. Here we go. Don't mind the old medieval dad breath all over your pillows. You're safe for the night. That's so gross. I can't even sleep in a hotel sometimes, let alone some dude. Mwah, 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 mwah. Mwah, mwah. I'm like, what are you doing? Get this guy out of here. Why is he kissing my bed? Clothes as well. That was also touched. Maybe not kissed, but it was for sure touched. Guys wearing my clothes in my bed, kissing my sheets? No way. I think I'd rather get poisoned. Take my jeans off, get out of there. Number 10, King Edward VIII. Directly after his father died in 1936, King Edward VIII took the throne, right? That's pretty normal. But the tides quickly turned when, less than a year later, he renounced his position. Now, this was of course a huge scandal right off the bat. This is not something that's taken lightly in the royal family. Turns out the woman responsible for stealing his heart was that of Wallis Simpson, America's socialite who had already been divorced once before and was at this point working through her second divorce. So you can only imagine how everybody reacted at that point, right? Oh, how dare she? His proposal to Simpson, of course, caused social and political backlash. The Church of England wasn't so chill with Edward marrying someone who had already been divorced. Yeah, they're not really okay with that. So Edward was forced to abdicate. Yeah, he had to, right, for love. Edward and Simpson then tied the knot in 1937, and they stayed together until Edward's death much later in 1972. Sliding into royal DMs right off the hop. Okay, we're in for a treat. Number 9, dark predictions. Of course, in recent years, the royal family has seen a change that many didn't really expect. When Harry and Meghan chose to renounce their royalty status, speculation began that this could be the beginning of the end for the monarchy. People only fueled their fire with questions. And also, somebody may have called it. Yeah, Nostradamus, he may have predicted this entire event. One of his predictions literally reads, at the end of the war, the great powers change. Near the coast are born 3 beautiful children. They will ruin the town when they come of age, they will change the kingdom, and they will not see it grow anymore. Now, Harry is only one of 2 children, so I'm not sure if the, quote was talking about him and his siblings, or if it has more to do so with some other royal family members, but either way, there's some people who take Nostradamus' words very, very seriously out there, so I had to include it. Maybe there's something there, I don't know, maybe there's something we haven't quite broken down yet. That's why we need National Treasure 3, maybe this is the plot. Number 8, King Henry II. While we're on the topic of him, could Nostradamus have actually predicted the death of King Henry II? Because if he did, that's pretty curious, I'd say. Never used the word curious in my life, but I'm like, you know what, that's curious. King Henry II was actually a personal acquaintance of the prophet himself. That'd be kind of cool, being friends with Nostradamus. I'd be like, hey, how does Game of Thrones end? Please. While at one point in history, Nostradamus was seen addressing King Henry II as the most invincible King Henry of France, unfortunately, Henry proved to be quite vincible when he met his gruesome death, might I add, at age 40. Yeah, in the summer of 1559, not a great time. A terrible jousting accident went wrong and it left the king passing away shortly after from sepsis. This is a terrible story, but I have to explain because, it's history and well, that's what we're here for. The jousting accident saw the king having splinters driven into his eye and then his skull as well by one of his young soldiers. And the Nostradamus quote reads, "The young lion will overcome the older one. It says he will pierce his eyes through a golden cage." Okay, already we're a little bit spooky. And that 2 wounds will ensure a cruel death. So I'm not saying he predicted it, I'm just saying, kind of nailed it. Number 7, a fateful turn of events. Queen Victoria, her reign began back in 1837 and it lasted until the Queen's death in 1901. Now at just age 18, Alexandrina Victoria had to rise up to the throne. Had to, right? All these cases, it's like, yeah, they have to do this. She was born, of course, on May 24th, 1819, and Queen Victoria was actually 5th in line when she was born, nowhere near the throne. So right off the bat, it was actually highly unlikely that she would ever see the crown. But one by one, all of her family members began passing away fast. In 4 years, 3 of Victoria's cousins passed away, and then her father and her grandfather both died 1 week apart from one another. So on one hand, obviously it's sad, it's tragic, everyone's dealing with loss so fast. But on the other hand, by the time 1830 rolled around, Victoria was only 11 years old, and already she was next up to bat for the throne at 11. Imagine, that's like some ancient Egypt. Number 6, the Great Irish Famine. The Great Irish Famine took out many people. Back in 1845, potato crop that a lot of the Irish population relied on were suddenly no longer available. See, a group of microorganisms wiped them out, and in result, around 1 million folks died or had to leave. Now, it was draconian law and British ruling at this point that made the exported food hard to reach people. That's where things stopped. This famine led to Irish independence, of course, and anti-union movements, and the show Victoria pulled back 0 punches in 2017, where an episode showed the true happenings behind the Great Irish Famine and the role that Queen Victoria played in coming to the aid of her then subjects. It was the death of at least 1 million people. This was a very dark 7 years in Irish history. Historian Christine Keneally spoke out and says, quote, "There is no evidence that she had any real compassion for the Irish people in any way." Yikes. That's a historian saying that. That's how you know. Number 5, Meghan Markle solo strut. Okay, back in May 2018, we all set our alarms, we woke up early, and we all watched the royal wedding, right? We sipped our tea in our pajamas and we pretended like we were there, right? Just watching along with the other billions of people online. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, his new Duchess. At the historic wedding, Thomas Markle was just a no-show. Yeah, Meghan just walked down that aisle by herself in front of 1 billion people watching at home or streaming it, and it was thought at the time that this was because of Thomas's health. See, right before the wedding, Thomas suffered a heart attack, right? Just days before, so of course nobody was upset. It was almost expected for him not to show up. But cut to a year later, we began talking again. Thomas and the Duchess are now not close, it seems. Thomas even spoke out against his own daughter at one point. There was a huge scandal where Meghan even spoke to Oprah, like Oprah and that big tell-all, and Meghan actually said to her father, "If you tell me the truth about working with paparazzi, we can help." And he wasn't able to do that, and for me, has really resonated, especially now as a mother, end quote. So yeah, they're not talking, I guess, anymore, which more than fair. If my dad was working with the paparazzi, showing them private letters, I'd be a little pissed too. There's no way though, the guy can't even unlock his email, let alone sending one? No way. Number 4, Prince Charles and Princess Diana's divorce. Prince Charles, the oldest son of the Queen, straight up admitted to having an affair with Camilla Parker before his divorce from his first wife, of course, Princess Diana. Imagine having this is crazy. A princess? You cheated on a princess? That's insane. So in turn, Princess Diana addressed the relationship and what's happening during, that famous 1995 interview with BBC. She couldn't have said it better, if I'm being honest. Diana said herself, quote, "Well, there's 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded." Yeah, end quote. There's no better way of putting it, I think. It's a pretty baller way of saying it. I don't know. I haven't said baller in like 13 years, but I'm like, you know what? That's a baller move. It's pretty gangster. Diana also said she was in love with riding instructor Major James Hewitt during her marriage to Charles, so everybody was busy looking at their directions, it seems. Diana and Charles divorced in 1996, only 1 year before her tragic car accident. Now later in 2005, Charles ended up marrying Camilla. Has anyone seen Spencer? Kristen Stewart looked great in that movie, and now I want to watch it. Is it worth the watch? Let me know in the comments. I didn't see it go to theaters or anything. It kind of snuck by me. I was sleeping on all the good ones. Number 3, Prince Harry costume party. YouTube isn't a fan of some words, specifically one word that rhymes with Yahtzee, and it goes deep with history, as you could assume what I'm talking about. But with this being one of the biggest scandals, I have to bring it up, right? The Duke was always referred to as a bad boy, right? He was the bad royal, the bad boyle royal. I don't know, I'm trying new shit here. But just how deep did these incidents cut? Well, before he settled down with Meghan in 2018, Harry had to issue a public apology back in 2005 because, whoops, somebody got photos from a costume party, and a few of them were in poor taste. Did the royal dress up as the Beast from Beauty and the Beast? No, he did not. Did he dress up like a witch? Like a little witch, maybe with a nice witch broom? No, none of that either. No, photos leaked of him wearing World War II German soldier gear. Yeah, I can't say too much, but it was even equipped with an armband, a very bad armband. Again, I can't say too much, nor will YouTube allow us to show too much, but you understand what I'm trying to say. You remember. It was poor taste. He could have dressed up in any way he wanted. He's a literal prince. And he does this? It's off-putting. Harry said afterwards, and I quote, "I am very sorry if I caused any offense or embarrassment to anyone. It was a poor choice of costume and I apologize." End quote. Nice, right from the heart. That's good. Really goes deep with the royal history. We love it. Number 2, Vegas getaway. Nice, roll those dice. It's one thing to party like a rock star, but to party like a prince? What does that even mean? I gotta keep this Prince Harry train going because, well, now I'm mad at him, but there's even more photos from history that show what was really going down in the royal family, His priorities. 30s, dare I say. After that party incident, just 7 years later, scandalous photos emerged from Harry's Las Vegas trip. Yeah, he had a little boys' night, it seems. It turns out what happens in Vegas may just leak online for your entire family to see, and your grandmother. That's probably not a great time. These scandalous pics were taken during a strip pool game. Lovely, we like that. Make sure you call the right pocket while you're not wearing any. The scandal actually prompted St. James Palace to contact the Press Complaints Commission before the snaps even made their way to British tabloids. Yeah, they knew right off the bat they were fucked. They're like, can we call them? Can we send a pigeon? What's the fastest? And finally, number 1, Boy Jones and other attempts. Okay, being the queen and all in history, a security team is always needed, obviously. And during her reign, specifically Queen Victoria, there were multiple attempts to harm the young queen. First attack was in 1840. It was an 18-year-old man named Edward Oxford, and he fired towards the Queen's carriage. When Edward was accused of high treason, of course, afterwards, he was actually found not guilty due to, you guessed it, insanity. A couple years later, in 1842, it happened again. This time, 2 men fired at her, both also missed. In 1849, her carriage was attacked by William Hamilton. In 1850, as the carriage was passing the gates of Buckingham Palace, Robert Pate, a retired soldier, might I add, ran up and hit her with his cane. Victoria was okay, luckily, but of course she was shook. Then these incidents kept occurring again in 1842, 1849, and 1872. Attempt after attempt after attempt. But then things got a little worse and, dare I say, a little bit more weird. If you haven't heard of Boy Jones or anything that happened there, I saved it for last because it's so horribly creepy. A teenager stalked the Queen back in 1838 until 1841, and his name was Edward Jones. Edward Boy Jones. This guy somehow managed to break into Buckingham Palace more than once, right? Before Assassin's Creed came out, no idea how we thought of this. Guy just knows a route in, and he would break in and would hide under the Queen's sofa. That was his go-to spot. Or he would sometimes just sit on her throne. And one of the worst things ever, sometimes he would go through her drawers. He would go through the Queen's drawers.
Number 10, the pressure. As much as the royal family's existence is a complete sham, the power that is given to them by their adoring idiot public must reflect poorly on the nerves of the staff. Like it or not, which I don't, these losers are the face of an entire country. And so if you make a mistake while working for them, suddenly you've just spit in the country's face. There have been a number of instances where members of the staff have come forth with stories of what it's like to work for these middle-aged children, and every single time it's been embarrassing. Most of them are going to be sources of points on this list, but hey, you know, the pay's worth it, right? Number 9. How to Call the Queen to Dinner. On June 3rd, 2011, a documentary was released detailing exactly what it's like to work as a royal servant. It details the hardships faced by members of the staff, but one stood out to me in particular because of just how utterly pathetic it was. In the documentary, one former staff member recalled how he'd called the Queen to dinner by stating, "Your dinner's ready." Oh my goodness, how could he say that? Doesn't this loathsome worm know that the proper way to call baby for din-din is to clearly state, "Your Majesty, dinner is served"? Oh, and you'd better not forget their bib, lest baby make boom boom. But hey, the pay's probably worth it, right? Number 8, no vacuums. One of the stranger rules that is inflicted on the staff is the demand that they do not use a vacuum cleaner until after 10 a.m. This means that when cleaning the entirety of that oversized eyesore of a palace, it must be done by sweeping until everyone is ready for their ears to withstand the atrocious assault made by such horrid machinery. Have you ever actually swept a floor in your life? Do you know how long that takes? And in a house of that size? Well, there's being polite, but come on. Well, I mean, come on. At least the pay's worth it, right? Number 7, catering to their whims. These are slightly less defined, but it's generally well known that every single member of the royal family has their own peculiar quirks. As a result, every single royal aide must memorize the exact needs of a family member and conduct themselves accordingly. This has been famously cataloged in Margaret's human ashtrays, people who accompanied her solely to ensure that she did not have to think about where she was ashing her cigarette. Better remember which exact fruits these people like at which exact state of rottenness and temperature, or you're out of a job. And yes, this also includes the dogs. There's a butler for the dogs. But hey, at least the pay is worth it, right? Number 6. Tactical dinner planning maps. To the royal staff, dinner isn't just a fact of life, it's an arrangement. Everything must be perfect every single time, and reportedly that's still down to the little old thing of memorizing what everyone actually wants and where. As a result, there are supposedly literal maps that are printed out that must be followed to a T for every single dinner, or I presume someone will throw a temper tantrum. But hey, at least the pay is worth it, right? Number 5. Walking rules. I don't even know. It's just, don't stop coming with these weirdos. Okay, it's a staff rule to never walk down the center of any corridor because it might wear down the material. This is something that the staff is required to do. I love it. Not only that, but whenever the ruler is in any room, if they're standing, you're standing. You can only sit when they sit. This goes for everyone. Why? Why does this matter? What have these people actually done to deserve this respect? The pay's absolutely worth it, right? Number 4, food. I cannot imagine cooking for the royal family. I think I would actually rather just die. Apparently, anything that could even potentially cause food poisoning just cannot be on the menu, so no shellfish, basically nothing from the ocean. This doesn't just go for the royals either, as former chef Darren McGrady described his role pertained to ensuring that the diets of the Queen's dogs were as healthy as possible. Not only that, but he apparently was even responsible for selecting the carrots the Queen would feed her horses based on length. Because if it was too short, the horse could nip her finger and give Her Majesty an ouchie. Ooh. But hey, at least the pay is worth it, right? Number 3, don't be seen or heard. Despite being the only things that are allowing these psychos' lives to run properly, the expectation levied on the royal servants is simply that they just must be invisible. Think about everything I just mentioned. Now, think about how you have to do all of this without being seen or heard. No complaining, or they might start to think that you don't like your job. Of course, if you hear them say anything, and you will, you'd better not remember it, or you'll be a traitor to the country. And then you could sell their secrets to the press and make thousands, but you really wouldn't want to do that because, I mean, think about how much money you're already making with this good job that you have. Right? Number 2, dealing with King Tampon. Not even the hardest thing to write on this list by a long shot. Yeah, King Charles has been reported to be an absolute nightmare to work for during his career. One report claimed that when he lost a cufflink in the bathroom, he supposedly smashed a sink to pieces in his quest to find it again. Another report claims that he demands his post-hunting snack be soft-boiled eggs. But since hunting trips are, difficult to plan exact times around, the staff will make eggs every 3 minutes during the half hour that he's generally expected to return, and just throw out the ones that have gotten too cold. If you don't believe me, look at the footage of Chuck gesturing for the aide to move stuff off of his desk. Look at how pathetic this man is. Really sear it into your brain exactly how worthless of a human being he is. Now call him the king, you peasant. But hey, the pay's good, right? Number 1, the pay. You knew where this was going, but you probably didn't know exactly how much. The average royal servant makes around £1,800 annually. That translates to roughly 20,000 United States dollars and 27,000 Canadian dollars. Way below living wage. I have actually, and I am not being hyperbolic here, I have worked dishwashing jobs in downtown restaurants that have paid far better salaries than this. I know they get to live on the premise. I know they get free meals, and I don't care. Selling your life away to live for the whims of a bunch of incestuous old rich white people in the world's most opulent retirement home is one thing, but selling it for cheap is too much. The work and training that these staff members have to go through is insanely rigorous. They are living other people's lives as a profession, and they are being paid what is absolutely next to nothing. I don't care how many cute little handouts Meghan Markle gave her assistant or whatever. This is inhuman, and it is just disgusting.
Number 10 is Eric the 14th. That's a lot of Erics to get to 14, and it's a lot of paranoia in his case. The Swedish king survived 3 years of ruling before he lost his mind, first taking the throne in 1560, and then having his life taken in 1577. In 1563, when the crazy struck, Eric became violent and paranoid, rubbing his nobility and court members the wrong way until he pulled a daring move, imprisoning the Stur's noble family for allegedly plotting against him. However, he quickly came to the conclusion that the incarceration wasn't enough and decided to have them killed instead. Eric himself participates in their grisly deaths, and after their death sentences, Eric wandered outside to the woods and disappeared for 3 days. This led to open conflict between Sweden's nobility and Eric, who was eventually dethroned and imprisoned by his despised half-brother John in 1569. The former king languished in prison for the next 7 years before being put out of his misery in 1577. Turns out Eric's paranoia may have been onto something. After the 20th century exhumation, forensic scientists determined Eric died from his pea soup being poisoned. Number 9 is the Glutton, a nickname for King Afonso, also called the Grinning Moron. A nickname he earned from doing things like wearing 6 hats at once, tiered Mad Hatter style, or because he visited all the nunneries around to offer himself up as a willing bedmate. This is also the king who famously saw his 2 older siblings die, and instead of crying, he cheered and went, "Hooray, now I will be the king of Portugal." All of this perceived madness allegedly comes from how Afonso was ill as a child, and it left him partially paralyzed and mentally unstable. Unfortunately, he found pleasure in violence, and this made for a bad combination, especially when a local boy named Antonio, who liked to whip stones at people, offered the king knives and said he should join. Afonso's mother tried to stop her son, who now went out at night and tormented the poor villagers and forbade Antonio to enter the palace. Deprived from Antonio's company, Afonso became completely unmanageable and refused to eat food like a brat. So they let Antonio back in. He soon established himself in a room next to Afonso and began to lead the king on nightly excursions, jumping respectable citizens and raiding taverns. This goes on for years until his mother dies and Antonio is sent away. Then Afonso focuses his attention onto food. At the age of 23, Afonso was incredibly large thanks to gluttony. He used to take his meals in bed and usually ate and drank so much he was sick afterwards. Ministers ruled on behalf of the screw-loose Afonso for years, but they still tried to make Afonso behave like a king. Told what to do, he did it. Told what to say, he said it. Still, his way of life infuriated the Portuguese clergy, so they find him a wife hoping it'd calm him down. Instead, they annul and she marries his younger, hotter brother, and the two begin planning a coup. In his final days, like many of the other monarchs on this list, he was confined. It was said he wore a groove in the floor from pacing since he couldn't do anything else. Number 8 is Snotty King. Unlike Afonso, who victimized the nearby villages, France's King Charles IX actually went after others in his court, including his sisters and even animals. Charles had a disfiguring birthmark between his nose and upper lip, giving him the nickname the Snotty King, and he was given to fits of rage and sadism, though he was a mama's boy to his regent Catherine de Medici, who literally ran this country even once the king grew up. In 1561, at the age of 10, Charles took the throne after all eligible heirs had died, through no fault of his own. As he grew up, Charles became tall and physically strong, but his physical and mental problems increased with age, and as one suffered, so did the other. Charles was unbalanced to the point of insanity, and his anger was solved through violence or death that only Margot, his youngest sister, knew how to calm. If she wasn't around, someone would hand him a bow and arrow and say, "Hey, go hunt some deer nearby." However, things like hunting and field sports didn't satisfy his bloodlust, and that's exactly what it was, bloodlust. To quote Charles himself, he preferred to use the knife because he liked the blood and wanted to see it spurting out of animals. Shudder. So he fed this lust by dismembering domestic animals. He also liked lashing people until they bled, or going down to the blacksmith to beat out weapons for his armory until he was prostrate with exhaustion exhaustion. Then he'd go use them on more animals or people. Number 7 is Fyodor the Bellringer, who was the son of Ivan the Terrible and wasn't thrilled about ruling and left most of it up to his brother-in-law Boris Godunov. This would-be ruler is remembered for having next to no neck and spindle legs that made him shuffle in a stooped manner. That and his glazed vacant gaze paired with a permanent gillless smile that was variously ascribed to religious ecstasy or simple-mindedness, depending on the observer's point of view. Suffice it to say, even Ivan the Terrible knew his son was missing a few screws. So, anticipating his own death, Ivan had tried to smooth the path for his humbly gifted son by creating a 5-member advisory council to help him rule, which is how Boris ends up in charge. Because Fyodor didn't just not know how to rule, but he wasn't interested in doing so. In the 16th century Russia, feeble-mindedness was considered an especially inspired and childish form of wisdom, a foolishness in Christ. Apparently in the olden days, Russians characteristically looked at these persons with respect, if not reverence. This is why, unlike so many kingdoms on this list, Fyodor wasn't just tossed in a room and left to rot. Homeboy actually dies peacefully in his bed. Fyodor spent most of his time praying, visiting monasteries and churches throughout the realm, and of course, what he was named for, ringing the bells that called the faithful to mass. Number 6 is Maria of Portugal. She starts as Maria the Pious, the first undisputed queen regent of Portugal and the first monarch of Brazil, who spent the first 10 years of her reign as an eloquent and respected leader. Then 1786 rolls around and she needs to be carried back into her castle due to a random state of delirium that hits her. Unfortunately, that wouldn't be the last. In 1786, Maria loses her husband/uncle, her eldest son and heir, her only daughter, and then her confessor consecutively. Maria had already been in a fragile state, but their losses caused her to nosedive into religious delirium, convinced she was going to hell for the sins of her father, claiming to see his black and charred corpse dragging itself along hallways of her home, or in her mind's eye, being tormented by demons. Visitors to her apartments would complain that they were tired of her constant screaming and wailing, which was only amplified by the bloodletting that was meant to cure it. According to some reports, she also became rather fond of wearing really tiny clothing. Number 5 is Charles the Mad. There's many crazy rulers named Charles. Maybe it should have been written off as a royal name at this point. But this Charles may have been mad because of schizophrenia, which nobody in his time would have understood or treated accurately. Honestly, much of the same can be said for multiple rulers on the list, as their afflictions were caused by mental illnesses and not always by the fact their parents were also their aunt and uncle. Charles didn't really become crazy at any given point, rather grew into it. He believed he was made of glass, liable to shatter at any moment. To prevent himself from shattering, the king had iron rods sewn into his clothing, the world's first Iron Man, so suck it, Tony Stark. In 1392, Charles attempted to kill his own friend and then got confused as to what was happening while he did it. Coming to, he thought someone else had jumped his friend, so he took an army after the supposed perpetrator. Then he falls back into the same weird state he was in when he tried to kill his friend in the first place and cuts down 4 of his own men. The others have to drag their king from the horse to get him to stop, at which point he enters a catatonic state and has to be wheeled back to the castle in a cart. They concluded that he was probably just under a lot of stress, as it was the first time Charles had really shown signs of not being totally right in the head. In the following years, Charles would go through episodes of forgetting people's names, including his own, and the fact he was king, when he wasn't running through his castle pretending to be a wolf and howling at people. He was later removed from power for acting insane, but not dethroned, since Charles the Mad lived for some 30 years after his first fit of the crazies, while his brother started a civil war for his throne. Number 4 is the Zhengdi Emperor. This Ming Dynasty ruler is one of their most notorious. Unfortunately, not for good reasons to end up on this list. Speaking of, if you're enjoying, maybe take a second to subscribe to The Hive to stay up to date, because we have plenty more lists like this. The Zhengdi Emperor was renowned for both his foolishness and his cruelty, despite making some major campaign and political decisions that benefited his country. When he wasn't, well, the emperor played pretend. He built a whole fake city block on imperial grounds where he would pretend to be a shopkeeper, to the puzzlement of his subjects who were forced to go along with it. Occasionally, he pretended he was an army general despite having no experience or expertise, and went on raiding parties where he'd almost get captured. And he'd make the entirety of the army dress in all silk for some reason while doing this. Weirder still, this emperor invented an alter ego he named Zhu Shu, whom he would order on these said pointless raiding parties, to the exasperation of his government, who had to pretend they weren't just talking to their own emperor in a wig. Ming-era novels such as The Zhengdi Emperor Roams Through Jiangnan cast the emperor as a foolish and gullible man, at one point enjoying a bowl of rice gruel he believes to be made from cooked pearls. Number 3 is Maria Eleonora. Desperate to give her husband an heir, Maria of Sweden had a slew of pregnancy issues that drowned her in postpartum depression and anxiety, on top of the court pressure to even produce a girl at this point, just something as an heir. This was a lot for her mentally, so when she finally did succeed in producing a child, a girl named Christina, she completely lost it. The postpartum was too much for this queen, who screamed that she hated the dark eyes and the hair of this girl, and woed over not having a son, and that God was punishing her. Meanwhile, the girl's father was wearing a big hat, cigar in hand, and grinning ear from ear. Christina had to be kept from her unstable mother, who couldn't be trusted alone with the girl after some sketchy incidents occurred. That changed when her husband, King Gustavus Adolphus, who was happy to have a daughter, was battle less than 2 years later. Maria Eleonora responded with hysterical grieving. She shrieked in despair. She was inconsolable, lamenting her cruel fate to be robbed of the light of her life while they were still both so young. That grief, however, included keeping her husband's body above ground for 18 months so she could periodically touch it, cuddle it, and kiss it, you name it. All the while, she made Christina sleep under a golden casket that contained her father's heart. But their relationship improved after that, and miraculously, Christina grew up to be a functioning woman and queen. Number 2 is Mustafa of Turkey. This is one where crazy can't be blamed on the dude himself or the parents being siblings, but rather the classic sultan tradition of locking the royal family away in cages to keep them from usurping the throne. Mustafa I was locked inside gilded cage for 10 years and was actually spared the usual fate of death by his elder brother Ahmed. After his brother died heirless, Mustafa's released from his golden cage, but then he's sent back just a few months later when his brother's son took the throne instead. Apparently, Mustafa was very neurotic from living in fear of sudden death while locked in a box for 14 years. When his nephew was in a coup just after 4 years, later in 1622, Mustafa was once again dragged from the safety of his cage to have the crown plopped on his head. He was frequently found running through the palace, knocking on doors and screaming for his dead nephew to come back and rule Turkey again. Many doctors treated Mustafa, but his condition only worsened. He was often seen talking to imaginary people and fed coins to fish and birds. What completely convinced the viziers that something was off was when, during a court meeting, Mustafa yanked on their beards and tossed off their turbans as part of a fit. He was dethroned after 3 months of rule because he refused to bed a woman, and concerns for an heir flourished. That, and he was nuts. Number 1 is George III, who made it 28 years before he was first hit with his mental illness in 1788, which we now believe to be a case of acute porphyria, anxiety, hallucinations, severe pain, nausea, vomiting, palpitations, high blood pressure, numbness, muscle weakness, brown or red urine, and blindness are some of these diseases' many symptoms, and they were ones all found in this wacky king. I said it first hit in 1788, and it hit hard. The king was gibbering for hours on end and foaming at the mouth. Symptoms deemed serious enough for a bill to be drawn up in Parliament for his son, George I, to become regent. Before the bill could pass, George, the initial one, recovered from his senses, and all was well with the king for the next 11 years. He had a small relapse in 1801 and 1804. Then in 1810, his mental illness came down hard, and it never left again. This intelligent, polite family man had turned into a raving lunatic. A visitor to Windsor was astonished to watch the king bury a stake near the castle, believing it would grow into a beef tree. Another saw the king trying to shake hands with an oak tree, believing it to be the King of Prussia. His doctor, Francis Willis, believed the root cause of the mental illness was overexcitement and intended to cure the king by strictly controlling his behavior. If the king acted up, Willis ordered the servants gag him and place him in a straitjacket and leave him to thrash around, making incomprehensible noises until he calmed himself down. When the king behaved himself, he was rewarded by being allowed to see members of his family. When he misbehaved, it was back into the straitjacket. Even mealtimes became a carrot and stick exercise. When George was bad, he ate mushed up food from a wooden spoon. When he was good, he got to use cutlery. The final blow came in 1810. Already almost blind due to cataract, the king suffered a final catastrophic mental breakdown that left him permanently gone. He would babble for hours, lost the ability to walk, and eventually succumbed to dementia. Towards the end of his life, he was incapable of understanding anything, such as the death of his beloved wife, and lived as a long-haired, bushy-bearded recluse in Windsor Castle until his death from pneumonia in 1820. Starting off with a classic, the Coburg-Kohari curse. One of the German branches of Queen Victoria's family were the Coburgs, who were famously cursed with more than hemophilia. Hungarian noble Antoinette de Kohari married into the family in 1815, and the bride's father persuaded the emperor to sign Antoinette the legal status of a man, allowing her to inherit his estates and whole fortune that wouldn't have gone to anyone in the male line. A monk named Brother Amerskius was one of the super distant male relatives, outraged at losing potential inheritance, so the brat cursed her. The hardest hit was the royal house of Portugal and the Kohari branch of the Saxon-Coburg family. Her son Ferdinand's wife dies in labor. Then Maria's successor Pedro lost his wife as well. Pedro then passes away, and a week before one of his brothers had died, then a week after Ferdinand, his other brother dies. Within 8 years, 5 members of this family are dead. Even Pedro's successor is plagued with misfortune, as are his children and Pedro's children. This whole family is killed in coups and inside jobs and tragic illness, right up to Prince Leopold in 1916, who pushes his lover to the edge, causing both of their deaths. deaths. The talk of the tabloids, Grimaldi witch curse. There are a couple different versions of the reason for the curse. Prince Rainier I abducted a Flemish woman who escaped, or she was a witch being burned at the stake by him. Whoever it was, they got revenge with the curse. Never will a Grimaldi find happiness in marriage. Prince Rainier III's father was gay and ended an unhappy marriage after 10 years to announce it. And while Grace Kelly and the prince were sold to the public as a great love story, the truth was he cheated on her a whole bunch before she passed in the 1982 car crash. Her daughter Stephanie, who survived the incident, endured several failed relationships, and Grace's other daughter Caroline had a tumultuous love life. With a divorce, her second husband who died in a speedboat accident, and her third husband, a prince, she now divorced. Perhaps taking the curse seriously, the current reigning Prince Albert III put off marriage for a long time, instead having a bunch of illegitimate children with various women before marrying Charlene Wittstock in 2011. It was super bumpy seeing as she found out about some love children, called it off, and then he persuaded her not to. She could be seen crying throughout all of her wedding footage. It followed through the lineage until it started a war. Caroline's curse. May heaven and hell blast your happiness. May your family be exterminated. May you be smitten in the person of those you love best. May your children be brought to ruin and your life wrecked. And yet may you live on lonely, unbroken, horrible grief to tremble when you recall the name of Caroline. Yikes. That's the curse placed on the Habsburgs after Caroline's son was executed for being part of the Hungarian uprising. In 1853, Habsburg Emperor had to dodge attempts on his life, but he found love with Bavarian Princess Elizabeth. They lose one daughter to illness before Elizabeth herself passes after birthing their son. Archduke Maximilian, heir to throne, is sent over to rule Mexico, where he's beheaded by Mexicans and his wife sent to an asylum. The hopes of the emperor now became centered on the crown prince, who married Belgian princess Stephanie despite being in love with Baroness Marie Vesteria. They're notoriously found dead in a hunting lodge in 1889, and it's ruled they've taken their own lives with no investigation ever done. The case is still known in Austria as the Mayerling mystery. I could keep going through generations of this curse, but I'll say it hits its crescendo with the killing of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and we all know what happens and what started that. Next up, the prophecy as promised. Amamalama placed a curse on the Raja Wadiyar of the Mysore kingdom in the early 15th century when he came to take her husband's throne. She had fled, taking her jewels to the nearby town of Talakadu, and when the officials came to apprehend her, she spoke a three-part curse before jumping into the Kaveri River to end her own life. The curse commanded Talakadu become a barren expanse of sand, and for the Malagangi, a village nearby the river, to turn into an unfathomable whirlpool. And she condemned the kings of Wayadar's family to not have any children for eternity. While the events don't play out exactly as she demanded, they came eerily close. Talakadu became a desert-like place. The river near Malagangi commonly sees whirlpools, and the Wadiyar family has only birthed male children in an alternative generation, which makes it difficult for kings to have direct heirs. Historian Dr. A. Verarapa explains that if we take a scientific view, there's no scope for a curse. But if you observe the Wadiyar family tree, 6 rulers since the 17th century have been adopted sons or nephews. The Wadiyars have too acknowledged this fact. But has the curse finally been broken? In 2017, India TV reports the current ruler, himself one of these adopted sons, and his wife welcomed the first Wadiyar baby in 54 years. It's one we all know and we can probably sing. Rah rah Rasputin warned them. The Romanovs were the last royal family ruling of the Russian Empire, and they had ruled the country for 400 years. Obviously by the 20th century it's about time for some change, and the Romanov dynasty was facing some serious challenges. I mean, we got World War I raging, famine and war-stoked aggression groups, and the Romanovs' only son Alexei was the sole heir and had hemophilia, which was a huge issue then. But Rasputin was able to keep the boy from dying on 5 separate occasions. Needless to say, from the perspective of the Romanovs, Rasputin was the only thing keeping the dynasty and empire alive single-handedly. Rasputin, however, issued a prophecy early in his life, before he even met the Romanovs. A vision that if someone killed him, their entire family would die with him at the hands of the Russian people. He made sure to be a broken record about this too. Well, his warning failed to discourage Felix Yusupov, who poisoned, jabbed, pew-pewed, and strangled, then drowned Raspy. And Felix was the cousin of the Tsar Nicholas of Romanov dynasty. Just like that, Rasputin's death was the end of the Romanovs, as just a few months later the Russian Revolution swept the monarchy out of power, executing all of them and making Rasputin's prophecy come true. A lesson in theft, the strawberry tiara. Why theft? Because a lot of these stolen jewels are the cursed ones, and it's not clear where the curse of the Hesse Darmstadt comes from, but the court jeweler points to the strawberry tiara as the culprit. The tiara was designed by Prince Albert, husband of Britain's Queen Victoria, for their daughter Princess Alice to wear on her wedding day. But before he could see her walk down the aisle in it, Albert died of typhoid fever at 42. Alice wore the tiara at her wedding and brought it to Hesse, where exactly 17 years later to the day of her father dying of the disease, Alice died of typhoid, but not before watching one of her daughters suffer and die of it as well. Alice, like Victoria, carried the gene for hemophilia, and through her daughters, Alice passed it on to the Spanish and royal families with tragic results. Perhaps none of that was down to a curse on the strawberry tiara, but then in 1937, 5 members of the Hesse-Ducal family were flying in a relative's wedding when the plane crashed while they were trying to make an emergency landing. Everyone on board was killed, and the strawberry tiara was recovered from the wreckage in one piece. This time, a curse waits 10 generations. Nepal had become a sovereign nation in the 1700s, ruled by Prithvi Narayan Shah, and there are 2 stories for how he became cursed. Both begin with him coming across a supposed hermit. Either what the hermit offers the king food, which he refuses, or the king offers the hermit a bowl of curd, which he eats and then tries to exorcist vomit on the king, who obviously moves out of the line of fire. Either way, the hermit is actually revealed to be the god Gorakhnath, and he was pissed. So, King Shah is told his line would fall after 10 generations. Horrifically, on June 1st, 2001, the then King Nepal Biryendra Bir Bikram Shah Dev and most of his family were together in their palace. For reasons that are still not clear, the Prince Dipendra, the king's son and heir, entered the room loaded with weapons and killed 9 people, including his father, mother, brother, and sister. Dipendra then tried to take his own life and ended up in a coma for 2 days, during which, because of how monarchies work, he was officially Nepal's king by default. Dipendra then dies and the crown is passed to Birendra's brother before Nepal ended its monarchy in 2008. It lasted exactly 10 generations. How a curse of twins led to Zulu defeat? Maybe. The Zulu people had a belief that twins were cursed, and Makabi and her sister Mamana were allowed to live because their father, King Jama, who loved his precious daughters too much, he just couldn't fulfill that obligation. His subjects were not impressed and proceeded to blame everything bad that happened to the Zulu on the curse the sisters carried by being alive. They even blamed them when their own mother died, which was bad news for the clan, seeing as she hadn't provided a male heir before her soul's departure. Makabe continued to buck tradition. When her father died, she became regent for the young half-brother that she had, even though no woman had ever held that position before. The Zulu called her a bloodthirsty despot, but she did step down voluntarily when her brother was old enough. 20 years later, his son, Shaka Zulu, Mayabaki's nephew, would ascend to the throne. Shaka was both a very successful king and a very violent person. He had a thing for killing his own people by the thousands for no reason. So, Mugabe, she arranged for his brothers to kill him. As he died, legend said he cursed the Zulu. "You will never rule this land. It will be ruled by the sparrows, who will fly across the sea and build their nests high on the cliffs." It's said this curse brought the oppressive white invaders that overthrew the next king, and the curse of Mabake led to the curse of Shaka, which led to the defeat of the Zulu. If she'd shown mercy, perhaps she'd be spared. Death of 3. Just as you have fired, in the same way one day you too will be killed, said Swami Kapatri on the 7th of November 1966. Since 1965, millions of saints in India had started a huge movement to enact laws on cow killings and cow protection. Indira Gandhi promised to do this as a prime minister and received blessings from the Hindu saint Kapatri. She never did though. So on November 7th of 1966, Gopashtami, the most sacred day for worshipping a cow as per Hindu calendar, a huge crowd of Hindu saints and Gaurashkas staged a peace protest in front of Parliament to demand a ban on cow slaughter and were attacked by the police force, resulting in the death of 5,000 plus Hindus. Indira Gandhi's government deployed an estimated 5,000 buses and trucks to remove any eyewitnesses, refusing to shoulder any responsibility for the attack and blaming it on the Home Minister. This is when Karpatri, devastated, curses her to die the same way she let the Hindus die that day. True to his word, Indira Gandhi is killed by her own bodyguards, the exact same way. And now, I hope you are ready for some curses on curses on curses. Pelops, he's going to marry the princess. He offers a servant a night with her if he helps kill the king. Naturally, it's a total double cross, and once the king is dead, the servant is ordered to be executed by Pelops. So, this basic ass servant curses Pelops' entire family and even backdates the curse to splinter reality. Tantalus questions the Olympics god's powers and kills his son, King Pelops, and feeds him to the gods while saying it's ox. The gods go, no it's not, and then he's the one cursed to stand in a puddle and he can't drink it, and then he's under the fruit he can't eat forever in the underworld, thus the word tantalize. 3rd generation, Pelops had 2 sons, Atri Atreus and Thyestes, who then kill their half-bro so they don't gotta share the kingdom with them. Thyestes starts sneaking off with Atreus' wife, so Atreus cooks his sons and feeds them to Thyestes. What is with this family doing that? Atreus himself fathered 2 sons before he was killed, named Agamemnon and Menelaus. They married Clytemnestra and Helen, who gets kidnapped and causes the Troy War. On the way there, Agames talks crap about Athena, who stops the wind and strands them at sea. Only answer, Agames has to sacrifice his daughter. He does so to the horror of his wife, and the wind returns and takes them to Troy where they win the war. Oracle concubine Cassandra, cursed by Apollo for not wanting to bang him, foretells his wife Clyte will smoke Agam for this, which she 100% does. Then Cassandra dies too, as foretold. Agam's son, Orestes, comes home to his sister Electra, now the 6th generation of the curse. Persuaded to avenge their father, he commits the horrible Greek crime of matricide and is so shunned by everyone he starts being tormented by fury demons. Within the day of her mother's death, she learns her betrothed took his life, so Electra does the same. Orestes is now completely alone, praying to Apollo. The god suggests, hey, take it to Athena for intervention. They put on the first trial in history in Athens. The jury voted. 5 voted guilty, 5 voted innocent. Athena broke the tie in Orestes' favor, and with that result, it seems the curse is now done. Orestes returns home to his kingdom to take his father's throne. However, he never marries and has no living family, so the curse of the House of Atreus ended with him, even if Athena hadn't sided with him. Alright. It's everywhere right now, so obviously covering it first. Number 10, how a blind date leads to being 1 in 1,000. It's been controversy since day one with Meghan and Harry, not because they did anything wrong per se, not at least at first, more so the usual sensualization drama that has to occur whenever a prince chooses a cool Hollywood gal to be his biddy. As you'll learn in this video, this was not the first time this has happened. The couple met on a blind date in 2016, and the relationship was confirmed in November of that year, immediately initiating waves of hatred and bigotry onto the couple for Meghan's ancestry, career, and how she even breathed. Really anything the media could latch onto. This onslaught is what promoted the couple to step back from the royal family in 2020, instead splitting time between the UK and North America and finding their own financial endeavors. They also made the rare royal move to take legal action against paparazzi for the excessive negative tabloid attention, part of which was exasperated by Meghan's dad sharing all her personal business with literally anyone who'll listen. That's part of the reason Meghan only had one guest of her own at their wedding that contained thousands, her mother. Since their marriage, all the scandal has revolved around the Oprah interview, podcasts, novels, and broadcast interviews. But now, as of this week, it's coming from suspicions that Harry and Meghan are taking a break. This follows Meghan's $20 million Spotify agreement being cancelled and causing apparent financial plight for 2 people that are already worth millions of dollars. Evidently, living all your lives out loud in this fashion from day one of a relationship will halt its healthy progression. But a source close to them is saying that this time apart in different continents isn't a breakup, rather time apart couple needs. I want to follow that up with the very similar story of the American divorcee, number 9. Like the gravy and mash that the Brits oh so love, this is scandal ladled on to scandal. In the early 1930s, Wallis Simpson was married to Prince Edward, was in line to become the king. By 1934, rumors had already started about the two having an affair, something they insisted that until their dying days never occurred. Anyways, when King George dropped in January of 1936 and Edward is crowned, he calls up Wallis, who proceeds to immediately divorce her husband. This now made her a 2-time divorcee, something the Prime Minister at the time stressed to Edward as being a bad idea. At the time, divorce was frowned upon, and the thought of a monarch marrying a divorcee, unheard of. Joke's on him though, because by December the Prime Minister is invited to the palace for a dinner where he's told by the new king his plans to marry Wallis anyway and abdicate. The Prime Minister and Edward's mother, Queen Mary, respond pretty much the same. What is wrong with you? Edward's reign lasted 324 days before he abdicated to marry the woman he loved. The couple was married in France on June 3rd of 1937 and promptly shipped to the Bahamas by Edward's family. Why? Oh, well, because the real scandal with these two is that they were Yahtzee sympathizers during World War II, a time when their own country was fighting the Germans, the same Germans and dictator, hint hint, that they went and hung out with and encouraged. Yikes. If you want to learn more about royal blunderings like these, be sure to take a second now to subscribe to The Hive. And speaking of, number 8 will be about marriage to the ex-youth. Uh-oh. If you can put together what I mean by that, y'all know this was a tabloid nightmare. Claus von Amsberg wasn't exactly the spouse people had in mind for the then Princess future Queen Beatrix of Netherlands. After After all, when Claus was younger, he was a member of the Schmittler Youth and later German army. This was already a problem for plenty of reasons, but the Dutch capital had lost pretty much all of its Jewish population to the horrific oppression and the now finished war. Their romance sparked a storm of protest in the Netherlands as a result. Claus was a low-ranking West German diplomat when he first met Beatrix, the then-crowned princess, on a Swiss ski slope during a winter holiday in February of 1965. They kept things on the DL until she warmed her parents up to the idea of meeting him, and to the surprise of many, Queen Juliana and her husband, Prince Bernhard, approved the match. Maybe it was because Bernhard himself was German-born, or their love was really that swaying, but I'd say part of it was the man himself. Claus initially was regarded as stiff and stern, and he worked really hard to shake off the habit he'd learned in his youth, and be vulnerable, showing a playful side to the public. He flouted royal protocol by removing a necktie during his speech and gave rides on the back of his bike during his wife's birthday. He also made himself favorable by mastering the Dutch language and learning to speak it with very little trace of a German accent. That, and he did give the Netherlands their first male heir in nearly a century. Well, he didn't produce it, Beatrix did, he just helped, he's just Ken. The two remained married until his death in 2002. Now here is a name we all know well, but not for this reason. Number 7 is Wed in Absentia. Marie Antoinette and Louis were married before they ever even met. On April 19, 1770 in Vienna, Marie's older brother, Archduke Ferdinand, was the stand-in for her soon-to-be groom. Ferdinand literally stood at the altar as Mary walked down. They exchanged their vows, exchanged the rings, jury's out on if the kiss part happened, but it was actually 2 days later that Marie left the country for the real deal wedding and groom. If you want to learn more about being wedded in absentia, how that works and where it comes from, check out my recent vid, The Top 10 Messed Up Marriage Traditions in Ancient Rome. It's on May 16th of 1770 that she and Louis are finally properly married at Versailles, a day after meeting for the first time in person. As was the custom, the groom's grandfather accompanied the newlyweds to the bedchamber. He blessed their bed, kissed them both, left them to produce a royal heir. However, this teenage couple was hiding a dark secret behind bedroom doors. Not only did they not have a baby, but they didn't even try. The couple didn't consummate their marriage for 7 years, and it caused a massive scandal. How could they not produce an heir? It was her job as a queen, and Louis needed to maintain the royal lineage. Historians have speculated why the couple didn't consummate their marriage all that time. So did the public in the 1700s, but the reasons are usually dumb witchcraft stuff. Nowadays it's assumed maybe Louis had a condition that affected his abilities, or maybe she experienced too much pain when they were trying. Honest answer? I think it's because they were young, the two probably weren't ready, and puberty probably hadn't done its thing and given them the drive. Either way, scandal ensued, and the story ultimately ends with heads rolling. This modern blonde is a different story, however, because she came just short of being the runaway bride. Number 6. As a wedding planner myself, I can tell y'all it's supposed to be tears of joy on your wedding day, not tears of get this bastard away from me right now, so help me God. Which was kind of the vibe that Prince Charlene of Monaco's wedding to Prince Albert II gave. Prince Albert and then Charlene Wittstock met in 2007 at the Mare Nostrum International Swimming Meet in Monaco when Charlene was an Olympic swimmer. They were engaged by 2010, but unfortunately Albert really liked having extramarital affairs. He had 2 children out of wedlock, as is, and then, per Vanity Fair, to quote, days before the wedding it was reported that the future bride had attempted to flee Monaco after discovering that Albert, already the father of 2 illegitimate children, had fathered a 3rd love child during their 5-year courtship. Then the video footage of their wedding on July 1st of 2011 pops up, and the bride is just bawling. Photos where she isn't, it's evident her smile is painfully forced. Post-wedding and the paternity lawsuit thrown at Albert, Charlene has gone on to insist that the wedding was the happiest day of her life and she felt absolutely zero despair. Her crying was the result of being overwhelmed. Since plenty of rumors of more affairs, potential divorce, and separate homes have arisen, nothing can be confirmed nor denied, and the couple remains married, raising twins. Here's a fun one, number 5, the Cougar Duchess. According to the Guinness Book of World Records, nobody on earth has held as many titles as the Duchess of Alba named Marie. She was known as a mover and shaker in the European social scene and regularly rubbed shoulders with everyone from royalty to Hollywood stars to ordinary people. With her striking frizzy hair, sometimes dyed red and most of the time white, Maria always displayed an eccentric, often outrageous fashion style. Throughout her 70s and 80s, she wore fishnet stockings and beaded anklets paired with loud dresses and lavish designer jackets. In other terms, she's your aunt that refuses to age age, has no kids, a cool crib, and pulls up to the family function in a fur coat and leather skinnies at age 88. She was a badass. She was also married 3 times and widowed twice. What caught the public eye was that husband 1 and 2 were both younger than Maria. The second husband by 11 years, and then the husband she was married to until she died, that's the one that caused scandal. He was 25 years her junior, Alfonso Carabantes. Spanish King Juan Carlos openly labels Alfonso as a gold digger, hoping to get his hands on Maria's extensive fortune. All of 6 of her kids are horrified and do the most to try and stop the wedding. But the Duchess told Spanish radio, all of her children are being divorced, so they have no right to give her lectures on morality. I don't know why my children are causing problems. We aren't hurting anyone. Alfonso doesn't want anything. He's renounced everything. He doesn't want anything but me, she said. The couple was said to have had a super happy marriage until her death 3 years later in November of 2019. And speaking of age, how about the new religion in at number 4? At the beginning of Henry VIII's reign in 1509, the British crown showed no signs of wanting to leave Catholicism. Yet when Henry started pining for Anne Boleyn, who refused at first, unlike the other courtly women and her own sister, to put out no matter what he did, it drove the man crazy with desire, right to the point he made the unprecedented decision to straight up divorce his first wife so he could marry Anne. The first wife, Catherine of Aragon, had been passed down like a family heirloom to Henry when his older brother Arthur died. Henry wasn't the biggest fan and had already been denied an annulment in 1527, so in 1533, Henry just married Anne in secret. She was already pregnant with Elizabeth, and the ceremony took place in the middle of the night just before dawn at Whitehall. There was only 4 or 5 witnesses, mostly Henry's close friends, and then the marriage was kept under the strictest secrecy because Henry, of course, didn't have permission from the Pope to divorce, let alone remarry. When the Pope raises a fuss, Henry's reaction is to just casually declare himself the head of the Church of England and completely splinter the religion from Rome, thus starting a whole new branch of a religious faith. As if forcing an entire country to switch religions for your marriage wasn't controversial enough, he later beheaded his wife for reportedly cheating on him. Number 3 is kind of a cute story, the coupon dress. Though you wouldn't guess it by looking at the dress because honestly, it's the best royal wedding dress I've seen come out of British monarchy. But did you know, due to the post-war austerity measures, Princess Elizabeth had to use clothing ration coupons to buy her dress. Determined to get her dream dress despite the doom and gloom the empire was recovering from, Elizabeth, who was just a princess at the time, saved up clothing coupons in order to pay for the materials. She received an additional 200 as a gift from the government, and most iconically, brides to be all around England, excited about her upcoming nuptials, sent her hundreds of their own coupons. Overwhelmed, Elizabeth made sure to return these coupons to every single woman who sent one, especially given it was illegal for them to be given away in the first place. The dress was designed by Norman Hartnell, and what he created was certainly fit for a queen. Chinese silk, high neckline, tailored bodice, and a classic fit and flare silhouette. The ivory silk gown had a 13-foot long train with the pattern installed by a Botticelli painting. The extra coupons, it said, went towards the extra materials needed to make it. It's incredible to think that the post-war restraint shown by the Queen in the last 1940s, less than a decade before her coronation. The scandalous nature of using coupons for a dress ironically was an afterthought, mostly pulled up once she became queen much later to try and besmear her for cheapness. Speaking of Elizabeth, for number 2, we'll talk about the snub. I don't care for royal drama, but the world knows that Diana was a gem, so Camilla can eat it. As you know, Diana was the lovely bride of Charles, the gross cheating weasel. To play devil's advocate, he always wanted Camilla and only her. The Queen and other royals kept them apart, and as a result, poor Diana suffered. Once she met her tragic end, Charles went happily about doting on Camilla as per usual. And now in recent times, as we all know, he married her. That's really it. That's the scandal. Everyone hates these two so much. Their marriage alone caused fury amongst everyone, including Elizabeth, who only begrudgingly allowed Charles to finally marry Camilla. Someone Elizabeth called that wicked woman and openly stated, I want nothing to do with her. And number 1 on the countdown, will it be Catholic or cousin? Which is worse, guys? Which would you rather marry? Well, in 2023, there's nothing wrong with marrying the first option, but you should not be considering the second. Don't do that. But George IV, Prince of Wales, decided married both. In 1785, George secretly married Maria Fitzherbert, a twice divorced commoner. I know. To make matters worse, she was Catholic. So not only was this match not approved, but at the time it was super illegal and technically made their marriage invalid. While courts and commoners and nobles alike berated the couple and scathingly referred to Maria as a mistress instead of their queen, these two lived happily together for a super long time. But the prince was a tad broke. He spent all his winnings lavishly, and in order to settle the debts he'd built, the parliament concocted a rather evil scheme. We'll pay it off, give you a new fortune, but you have to publicly deny being married to Maria. Well, He left her high and dry, that's to say the least. George then set up by the same parliament with a dashing young lass, his first cousin, named Princess Caroline of Brunswick. The two were not attracted to each other, had nothing in common, nothing to talk about, didn't even like each other. A match made in heaven, obviously. They agreed to a marriage which was commenced on the 8th of April, 1795, the first day they ever meet in person. Starting with Daisy and her pearls for number 10. Daisy of Pless was a beloved British princess, like Princess Diana of her time. Unconventional, playful, yet stunningly beautiful, she was highly cultivated in the public eye, but after World War II, it was one of her necklaces that demanded attention, quickly becoming one of the most wanted artifacts of its time. A pearl necklace given to her by her husband Hans, who she had married in 1891. The necklace was 22 feet long and one of the most expensive necklaces in the world. In fact, so expensive it cost a human life, as legend says that the necklace was cursed by the pearl diver who suffocated while collecting them. Maybe it's why she and her husband divorced. Well, not fully, because we know that's partly due to a rumor about Daisy and William II caused by her being the go-between for him and King Edward at the time. Fun side note though, the ex-hubby Hans goes on to marry Clotilde, of whom he has 2 children and 9 years of marriage before they annul, and Clotilde marries her stepson Bolko, the son of Daisy and Hans, and proceeds to give them their only grandchild. Fun family gatherings, I imagine. Anyways, after that weird little bump came World War I. Daisy served as a nurse and touched the hearts of Europeans by offering her help to soldiers on both sides of the conflict. Then came World War II, and many nobles were supporting Schmittler, but Daisy wasn't about it. Instead, she was active in the support and escape of prisoners from Gross Rosen, earning her the German enemy status and eviction from her properties in Poland. She actually died in rural Poland on June 29th of 1943. Due to research by the foundation of Daisy Pless, we know that Daisy sold most of her pearls in 1936. Her son Bolko was arrested by the Gestapo for unknown reasons, and he was tormented relentlessly for 2 months and only left the prison when his mother paid the NSDAP a huge amount of money. Money she'd gotten from cutting her beloved pearl strand and selling most of the stones. Sadly, the young man died because of his injuries caused anyways. But according to Daisy's grandson, if she was buried with the necklace, it wasn't more than 1 meter left of pearls. If not, the pearl's location's a true mystery. And what better place to lay than number 9, the bed of Ware, aka the bed that doesn't want you in it. I guess it just wants to stand there and look pretty. Earn its title, the most famous bed in British history. Man, what are you guys doing over there that's a classification? No wonder you had to steal everyone else's artifacts for your museums. Anyway, the story goes that this bed was made in the 15th century for our boy King Edward the, I think that's the 4th, by a carpenter named Jonas Fosbrook. Made of rich sturdy oak, carved, pruned, and plucked for a royal king, it's said that the bed is so large it can comfortably sleep 4 couples. Alright Edward, I see what you were up to there, you ain't slick. However, at some point in time, the bed found itself out of the castle and being passed around the inns like a princess turned working girl, as it circulated the inns of Ware, England, where commoners were able to sleep in it and cover it in graffiti. The disrespect and defacing of this regal item angered the ghost of Fosbrook, and now it said the carpenter has cursed this bed and his spirit may attack any commoner who tries to sleep in it, since he made it for noble blood only. So I guess if you want to find out if you have noble blood, go take a nap. If something is called a trumpet of war, I think you'd better not blow it, as proven in number 8. It's 1922. You bust into an ancient underground tomb that has a big sign on it that says, please don't bust into this tomb or ghosts will kill you. And inside it's got all this treasure and amazing stuff just chock full of curses. Curses everywhere. But you see 2 big ass bronze horns literally called trumpets of war, and the light bulb that goes off in your head is, I'm gonna play these for the world to hear on BBC radio. Anyways, yeah, these excited dummies decide to take an item that the Egyptians used as an announcement of war and death, and literally a horrific guttural wail of a sound, and play it for the world in 1939 on BBC radio. And it seemed that the universe took that announcement quite seriously, as it was only a couple months after that World War II broke out. Naturally, as the deaths of those on the excavation team were being chalked up to a curse, so was this. Moral of the story, stop touching Tut's stuff and get out of his room. Let's talk about a cursed amethyst for number 7. Shout out to all my amethyst birthstones, call them purple pals. Anyways, this cursed rock starts its life in the temple dedicated to the god Indra in India. Shocker! Seeing as pretty much every cursed gem out there, such as the Hope Diamond or the Kohinoor Diamond, is stolen from India, it's almost like there's a correlation between stealing gems and then the gems becoming death herring spite rocks. Who do you know? Anyways, so a British soldier, Colonel W. Ferris, snatched the stone and his health immediately goes to crap and he suddenly starts to go broke. He dies and the amethyst goes to his son, who then also loses all his money and becomes terminally ill. In an attempt to recover, he sends the stone to his friend to hold onto it, which the friend does do, right up until they take their own life and mail it right on back. The stone bounces to 19th century polymath Edward Heron Allen. He was skeptical at first, thus why he accepted the stone when many wouldn't, but regretted that quickly as his luck became unfathomably bad, even extending to family and friends such as a close acquaintance and professional singer who lost her voice one night after visiting and seeing the stone. Heron Allen tried to get rid of it as a result, throwing it in the canal, selling it, but it continuously returned to him. After the birth of his daughter and not wanting to take any risks, he decided to have it stored away in a bank vault inside 7 locked boxes with a note of strict instructions not to remove the amethyst until 33 years after his death, and his daughter could never hold or touch it. Less than a year after his death, however, his daughter donated the amethyst to the Natural History Museum. Next up is all too famous. It's the Terracotta Army, number 6. Many scholars believe that the Terracotta Army was never meant to be seen by the living. For centuries it existed as a myth, but the sudden discovery of a warrior by the farmers seeking groundwater unearthed a literal necropolis, and since then it's been nothing but a curse to those who found it and their community right nearby. Qin Shi Huang feared death and became obsessed with finding the elixir of life. Unfortunately, he thought murk was one of the key ingredients. Instead, it's what kills him in his late 40s. But by this time, he'd long prepared his tomb. It took 36 years and 700,000 workers to create the massive underground bunker that contained over 8,000 terracotta figures. The Chinese government has no intention to open the tomb until scientists can find a way to keep it preserved in the process, but they access and study what they can. Meanwhile, the men who discovered the warriors told Swiss News in 2013 that many of the older people in the village believed that disturbing them would bring misfortune. When the older ones saw these statues of gods and the bronze objects we had dug up, they weren't at all pleased. They said they were part of the local feng shui and that digging them up would do no good to either the village or to us. For the 7 men who encountered the Terracotta Army, this was downright prophetic. As news spread of the emperor's tomb, the government came to claim their farmland and demolish their homes for excavations, museum space, and souvenir shops. Among the well diggers, one took his life, while others died in poverty or had to resort to signing books about the discovery for meager pay. This king's wealth caused a gold fever, number 5. 363 Lydian artifacts, all dating back to the 7th century, are found in the Usak province of Turkey in 1966, and all 363 pieces have been nothing but trouble since. Now called the Kuron treasure, it's also known as the Croesus treasure, in reference to the Lydian king from the 6th century BC. No matter what you call it, locals only call it trouble. Lydia was a huge Iron Age kingdom existing from 15th to 14th century BCE to almost 545 BC, but by the 1st century BCE, almost all of their culture and existence was lost. The Karun treasure is automatically a massive historical, well, gold mine. It was discovered, retrieved, and sold by the villagers of Midiki, which after the government had to play track and trace to get it back. The battle between the Turkish government and the New York Met Gallery lasted from 1987 to 1993. When the Americans lose, they send back all 363 pieces, or at least the Turkish government thought. Turns out the old switcheroo was pulled, and in 2006, one of the artifacts is identified as a forgery. Now, nobody can say for sure how many are fakes. So, what is the curse connected to the famous treasure? Gold fever. Legends say that people get sick from the treasure, and they can't apparently stop themselves from trying to get a piece of it, meaning they'll do just about anything, including a decade-long legal battle and swapping out the real pieces for forgeries, or 43 years after its discovery, the director of the Usak Museum being arrested under suspicion that he had stolen some of the artifacts from the collection, or the 9 other similar arrests that have been proven to date. Stairwell to maybe the heaven is number 4. Don't know if it qualifies as a artifact, maybe a super large object, whatever. It's the Queen's House of Royal Museum's Greenwich, home to the first geometric self-supporting spiral stair in Britain. An absolutely hilarious note about this property is that also kicked off the curse of the Loveless Palace is that the house was commissioned by King James I in 1619 for his wife, Anne of Denmark, as an elaborate apology for him swearing at her in public. If anything, I believe his verbal response to be quite measured considering his wife had just accidentally shot one of his dogs. So, the Queen, however, fell ill and died in 1619. At this point, the first floor was completed and hastily capped off. During the reign of Charles I, the construction was started again once more, this time in dedication to his own wife, Queen Henrietta Maria, but this time it was interrupted by the English Civil War and the house is abandoned again, later to be repurposed to hold war prisoners. After the war, it became a boarding school, then a hospital school, then finally a National Maritime Museum. It seems that the building, initially meant for a gesture of love to make up for something foul, never got to be anything but foul and was cursed to remain a loveless place. I'd make a Lord of the Rings reference if I knew any. Number 3 is the stolen ring. Once upon upon a time in 4th century AD, Roman nobleman Sylvanus was stationed in Gloucestershire, England. The whole phrase is when in Rome, so Sylvie must have taken that mindset and applied it to when in Gloucestershire because he chose to go to the elaborate baths dedicated to the Celtic god Nodens, a deity associated with healing, hunting, and dogs, a real man's man. When Sylvie was at the temple, he took off his gold ring and left it on the side of the pool with his belongings, where it was stolen from him. Sylvie believed that it was Senecanius who stole it, as he was the only other person there at the time. Instead of going, yo buddy, hand it over, Sylvie, super casual and laid back, goes to the Nodens temple and prepares a lead curse tablet which he inscribed with, for the god Nodens, Sylvianus has lost a ring and has donated 1/2 its worth to Nodens. Among those names, Senecanius permit no good health until it is returned to the temple of Nodens. Both this ring and this tablet are found separately in history, yet it's in 1929, archaeologist Sir Mortimer Wheeler saw a connection between the two. While it can't be entirely confirmed, however, Seni is an unusually specific name and the close dates of the artifacts seem to support the theory. So, just to double check, Wheeler asked his friend J.R.R. Tolkien to help clarify what obscure god Nodens was and what role he might have played in history of the ring. As a result, it's believed that the ring of Senecanius was the inspiration for the ring in The Hobbit. Number 2 has got to be my favorite. It's the cat fur rug. That's right, a cat fur rug with a picture of a cat on it, all gift wrapped up around a mummified foot. Doesn't that sound like a real treat? This rug is sometimes referred to as the sacred cat rug and has the title of the oldest rug in the world. But aside from being ancient, not much else is known, as this artifact was purchased from treasure hunters who had plundered multiple sites without rhyme or reason, losing valuable excavation opportunities. When it was bought in 1913, the 2,400-year-old rug had a mummified human foot wrapped inside of it. The relation between this mummified foot and the cat hair rug is completely unknown. The rug, having come from Egypt, is believed to have been removed from a royal tomb or a royal temple, however, and it may have had a ritualistic purpose, especially given the not so subtle worship of cats found in ancient Egypt. The loom-weaved fur and the image on the rug are that of an African wildcat, but it's the curse that really makes things spicy. A papyrus inscription had allegedly come with the rug, but like the foot and who knows what else, lots of parts of this got lost thanks to illegal sales. It is alleged that anyone who is careless enough to step on this rug would die shortly after. Whilst it's unknown if this curse is true, since nobody's trying to step on the rug and find out, apparently when the rug was last restored, a dead cat was found stretched out on the front steps of the museum in the morning. Last but never the least, number 1 is the story of the Jade Seal. According to legend, a man named Bianchi found a giant stone containing the largest piece of jade in the land. He recognized its value and brought it to the ruler of Chu, named King Li. Li thought it was a useless rock, and insulted by the waste of time, ordered Bian's foot be cut off. When King Li died, Bian tried again with the new king, Wu, but this monarch also thought it was just a stone, and like his father, ordered the man's other foot to be cut off. When Wu died, the crown passed to his son, Wen. Bianchi carried the jade stone to the foot of Mount Chu. There he cried until, to quote, after 3 days and 3 nights, his tears were all exhausted and blood flowed out. At this news, King Wen sent men to ask him the reason. I am lamenting not the loss of my feet, said Bian in reply, but for the calling of a precious gem, an ordinary stone, and for their dubbing an honest man a liar. This is the reason I am lamenting. Impressed by Bian's adamancy, King Wen ordered the royal jeweler to cut and polish the stone. Lo and behold, inside was the largest piece of pure jade the king had ever seen, and in honor of what Bianchi did to uncover the precious jade, King Wen called the piece He-She-Bi, meaning he's jade disc. Then in 283 BC, the precious jade was stolen from the king of Chu and sold to the state of Zhao, and the king of Qin offered Zhao 15 cities for the jade. King of Zhao realized it was a trap and steals the jade back from the Qin, but the Qin dynasty would have its revenge. So in 221 BC, Qin Shi Huang conquered the 6 warring states, including Zhao. Victorious, Qin ordered the jade to be carved so the most fantastic piece of jade would forever serve as the Qin imperial seal. Legend has it that the jade was inscribed with the words, "Having received the mandate of heaven, may the emperor lead a long and prosperous life." And since that moment it was carved, it is being cursed. From 221 BC onward, the heirloom seal of the realm passed from emperor to emperor. But when the Ming dynasty came into power in 1368, it had vanished. There are several theories as to what happened to the seal, and every now and then someone claims to have found it, but nothing's been confirmed thus far.
Kicking off the list at number 10, 18 years old. Queen Victoria's reign began back in 1837 and lasted until the Queen's death in 1901. At just age 18, Alexandria Victoria had to rise up to the throne. She was born on May 24th, 1819. Queen Victoria was the 5th in line when she was born, so right off the bat, it was actually highly unlikely she would ever get the crown to begin with. And then one by one, all of her family members began passing away. In 4 years, 3 of Victoria's cousins passed, and then her father and her grandfather both died a week apart from each other. So by the time 1830 rolled around, Victoria was only 11 years old, and already she was next in line for the throne. Number 9, the Kensington system. So as if that wasn't already stressful enough being at that age and already seeing what's happened, Victoria was brought up under the Kensington system, which if you haven't heard of before is pretty awful. Victoria's mother, Duchess Victoria of Kent, created this Kensington system to control her daughter, ideally. She literally isolated the child from playmates or even family members. Her mother did this to keep her pure. Yeah, the system sounds awful. Her mother would monitor her every single action, including who she can see or speak to. Victoria only had 2 playmates growing up entirely. She had her half-sister, Princess Fedora of Lenigan, and the Duchess's attendant, Sir John Conroy, his daughter, Victoria. I mean, I only had 3 friends growing up, but this is just cruel. This is a whole new level. She shared a room with her mother until she was the queen. She literally couldn't walk down the hallway alone without her mother being right there by her side. Victoria has reflected on her childhood, and obviously she hates John Conroy for manipulating her mother. She refers to him as demon incarnate. Number 8, publicity. The Duchess was pretty cruel to Victoria. Just because you're next in line doesn't mean it's going to be glamorous speed dating and no one's doing a musical number while you meet your handsome Prince Charming. It's nothing like that at all. Victoria was forced to go on these long, excruciating, boring tours around England in hopes for the Duchess to sell her daughter to the public eye. So these crowds would start to gather at all these appearances. They loved the young Victoria. Thing is, during one of these tours, October 1835, Victoria got really sick. She had a bad fever, and the Duchess was using the weak Victoria. She was taking advantage of her. But luckily she got better, and obviously her mother couldn't do anything crazy, but she had her sights set on her while she was sick. That's pretty cruel. That's disgusting. Number 7, name change. Every year on May 24, we set off fireworks and we have way too many hot dogs. It's the best, right? It's called Victoria Day. It's for sure called Victoria Day, right? There's no question about that. Victoria Day, her day. Well, back in 1819, Victoria was christened in an almost private ceremony. It was small, and Victoria's uncle, Prince Regent, only let a few people come. Her name, as I mentioned earlier, was originally Alexandrina Victoria, and at that time, the name Victoria wasn't regal. It was of French origin, almost an odd name to have at the time, really. So when this throne snuck up to her, she was advised to change her name to something more traditional, but as our calendars tell us, she said, nah, I'm good, I'll keep it. Number 6, moving out. Queen Victoria had turned 18 right before she was handed the crown. The timing here was key because now this meant Victoria could leave and just do things. Yeah, for once in her damn life, she could leave her mother and John. She moved from Kensington to Buckingham Palace, and after that point, Victoria, of course, didn't speak with John or her mother really ever again. It was just a couple years into Victoria's reign where John's influence started to get limited. He ended up resigning, and then he moved to Italy, and then when she was crowned a year later at Westminster Abbey, Queen Victoria wrote in her diary, "I shall remember this day as the proudest of my life." Queen Victoria was the first royal family member to live at Buckingham Palace. She moved. She was like, I'm gonna go live over there and be the first. I'm gonna start my new thing. I'm never gonna live in a palace. I'm like, that's a good castle, I like it. Driveway's a little long for me. Shoveling would hurt my Canadian back, but otherwise, I like the bricks. Number 5, the bedchamber crisis. May 1839, the bedchamber crisis happened when Whig politician Lord Melbourne resigned as Prime Minister. This is a big deal because it was only a couple years right after Victoria became Queen. So again, timing here was just not ideal. The first Prime Minister, Whig politician, Lord Melbourne, was close with Victoria originally. He actually convinced Victoria to appoint a good amount of her ladies in waiting. So he had power over her, but it was a mutual agreement. It wasn't like, the other power that she had her whole life. They were homies. They were homies, I said in a video about Victoria. So in 1839, when Melbourne resigned, Tory Robert Peel came in to be Prime Minister, and he requested that Victoria dismiss these ladies in waiting and then replace them with Tory ladies. Well, since Victoria was an OG and these were her only real friends if there was such a thing growing up, she said no. So of course she was criticized for such a choice. Prince Albert luckily was able to have some of her ladies resign voluntarily, so things smoothed over eventually, but the Queen honestly never got a break, even on the happiest days, like number 4, her engagement. The life of Queen Victoria wasn't anything like a fairy tale, obviously, as I've said anything so far. So when you think about the royal family, at least when I was younger, I thought being a queen or king was just eating chocolate all day and then you attend galas. Yeah, you just eat yummy foods, wear a crown, look cute, and then go to the ball. No, not quite. That's not really how it's like at all. Victoria had to do everything herself. She even had to propose to Prince Albert. It's royal tradition that nobody shall propose to a reigning monarch, so in October 1839, Victoria had to ask Albert for his hand in marriage. It all started when the pair were 17 years old. Victoria met the young prince, of course, at Kensington Palace. They were put together because Victoria's uncle felt like this could be beneficial down the road. They were first cousins, now they're getting married, which sounds bizarre, but as you've seen on this channel before, with royalty and stuff, it's quite common. Number 3, first marriage. The wedding of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert happened in St. James Palace Chapel on February 10, 1840. This was a big deal because it was the first time a ruling queen was getting married. This hadn't happened in 286 years. The last marriage of a reigning queen was in 1554, and that was Queen Mary I. Queen Victoria had 12 bridesmaids, wore white, had a lovely dress, thing was like 18 feet long, it was gorgeous. But it must have been so overwhelming for the young queen because she was isolated for her entire life, and then all of a sudden what? You're getting married outside at 20 in front of all these crowds? After the wedding, Queen Victoria's head was hurting. It was probably so stressful, but she still had the time of her life. She wrote this in her diary after her wedding. She wrote, "I never spent such an evening. My dearest, dear Albert. His excessive love and affection gave me feelings of heavenly love and happiness I never could have hoped to have felt before. He clasped me in his arms and we kissed each other again and again. His beauty, his sweetness, and gentleness, really, how can I ever be thankful enough to have such a husband? To be called by names of tenderness I've never yet heard used to me before was bliss beyond belief. Oh, this was the happiest day of my life." Yeah, when you're locked up and you have a horrible duchess watching your every move, this day probably sounds like a nice break. A well-deserved break, I'd say. Eat all the cake you can have. Number 2, attacks. Being the queen and all, a security team is always needed. And during her reign, there were multiple attempts to harm the young queen. The first attack was back in 1840. An 18-year-old man named Edward Oxford fired towards the queen's carriage. When Edward was accused of high treason, he was actually found not guilty due to insanity. A couple years later, in 1842, it happened again. This time, 2 men fired at her. In 1849, her carriage was attacked by William Hamilton. In 1850, as the carriage was passing the gates of Buckingham Palace, Robert Pate, a retired soldier, ran up and hit her with his cane. Victoria was okay, luckily, but of course she was shook. And then again in 1842, 1849, and 1872, attempt after attempt after attempt. But at one point, things were creepy and almost worse. Number 1, Boy Jones. If you haven't heard of Boy Jones or anything that happened here at all, I saved it for last because it's very creepy. It's mind-blowing in a horrible way. A teenager stalked the queen back in 1838 until 1841. His name was Edward Jones. This guy somehow managed to break into Buckingham Palace more than once. Just some Assassin's Creed going on here. Guy just knows a route, I guess. That's so scary. He would break in and he would hide under the queen's sofa. He would sit on her throne and, one of the worst things ever, he would go through her drawers. Figuratively and literally. Like he would go and he would steal her clothes until eventually and thankfully the guy got caught.
Number 10, Marie Antoinette, Madame Deficit, the last queen of France and maybe the last time royals got away with, well, being royals. Her whole existence was opulence, which is really just salt in the wound when most of your citizens probably can't even afford a portion of salt because they're broke or because there's food shortages. Wasn't a good time. But if you looked into the royal palace, you can bet she's got a pantry full of bread and a bowl of fruit just ready for the pickings. She even had the nerve to purchase a necklace that, if through today's inflation, will be worth $12 million US. Ooh, that's a lot of money I wish I had. People were starving, and honestly, if people don't have anything, including food, ooh, it's not gonna be a good time. Imagine a whole country acting up because they haven't had their Snickers yet. Well, that ended up sparking a revolution. Very confusing, and in all that confusion, both the king and queen lost their heads. Wasn't good. Number 9, Queen Victoria. Oh blighty. Man, it must be nice to have a whole era in history named after you. Maybe I'll get one day. The cheddar time. I don't know. Cheese, I don't know, big ched? We'll see what happens. Queen Victoria had some strange quirks about her. One that I can almost get behind, but not quite, is her niche for eating fast. Maybe too fast. I'm a guy who likes to make things simple, easy meals. The faster I can slip into a couch with an ice cold beer and a movie, I'm a happy guy. And or enjoy said food with the movie. Queen Victoria liked her meals to last no longer than 30 minutes. That means while you're on the appetizer, she's on the main course. And while you're on the main course, she's ordering coffee. Look, I respect the hustle. I get that. But maybe this is too much. That being said, are you going to be the one who brings it up to Her Royal Majesty? Listen, if you want to see tomorrow's 5-minute brunch, you better keep it to yourself. Number 8, Cleopatra. Don't we all miss Elizabeth Taylor? I know I do. Sometimes, I wish I was her. She's just beautiful. Can you blame me? I honestly wish I was the real Cleopatra too though. All that power, and to not have one, but 2 Romans wrapped around her finger. Ooh, she was the last pharaoh of Egypt, but maybe had the most drama. Sure, Elizabeth Taylor was the most beautiful and chic woman in all of Hollywood, and she may or may not have had a few men wrapped around her finger too, but she never had to deal with the world's largest empire and her own throne, all whilst managing to stay the most beautiful and chic. I can barely manage to toast in the morning. Never mind all those affairs and, well, the marriage affairs too. There's a lot of affairs happening. Number 7, Queen Isabella of Spain. Queen Isabella is known for a few things. A lot of stuff YouTube probably doesn't want me to talk about. Insert religious persecution here. However, I think she should be remembered for something else. Something rather strange. When I was a kid, I would run around outside for hours, oftentimes ending up in the mud. My mother would always say, "It's time to hose you down, son." And she wasn't wrong, because I probably needed a good hose down. Now, regardless of how much dirt was behind my ears, I didn't want to wash. I was this big stupid kid. Can you blame me? I was proud of the scruff, but that's because I was going to have another wash most likely within the next 12 hours. I always got hosed down at some point. Queen Isabella, however, boasted to others that she only bathed twice in her life. Sweet Lord Mary Mother of God woman, that is not something to boast about. Due to some water access issues, the Catholic Church was like, baths? Who needs them? You know what? Baths are sinful anyway. Being so close to God, so she doesn't bathe. Cleanliness is next to godliness, except in that time period where not bathing means you're actually closer to the big JC upstairs, so that's how it goes. Number 6, Queen Elizabeth II. No crusts! Queen Elizabeth II, the longest reigning monarch. God bless the Queen, and God save the Queen. Shout out to the UK, Chetty loves you, how you doing? Come and see me sometime, I love you guys. Now sure, she's not the most awful spoiled queen in history, but she is a queen, and that does mean she can have things her way. Like for example, all of her sandwiches have to have the crusts cut off. Yes, just like children. Yes, just the way I like them too. No, I'm not a big baby. I'm a big strong man who totally doesn't rely on the women in his life. No, what are you saying? Dude, stop. Mom, I love you. Anyway. Well, yes, it's true the Queen's sandwiches have to have her crust cut off. Is it the worst thing ever? No, I don't think so, but what if her sandwich showed up with crust? We don't really burn people at the stake anymore, so what would she do? Would she fire them, I guess? It's kind of a little thing to get fired over. I don't know. Anyway, speaking of getting fired. Number 5, Empress Irene. Mother dearest. Most people have fond memories of their mothers. Maybe you should call her. I'm just saying. Mother's Day happened. You should call her. Empress Irene was a woman who wanted power. Honestly, who doesn't? We've all got a little bit of Sith in us. Yes. Her son, who had naturally inherited some of her power, was growing stronger by the day. Now, maybe it was ego. Maybe it was envy. Maybe her son just took down her live, laugh, love signs. I'm not sure. But Irene was not having any of it. So, when her son least expected it, she had 2 guards apprehend him and had his eyes gouged out. Now, being that this was before 2022, this was a critical medical injury, and after 9 days of grueling pain, and when I'm sure it was a lot of blind confusion, the injury proved to be fatal. So, what's the lesson here? Blood is not as thick as water? I don't really know, it's just messed up. Number 4, Queen of Castile. Life can be tough sometimes, especially when we lose the ones we love the most. Everybody deals with things differently. The Queen of Castile is a person who deals with that, well, very differently. People passing on was no rare occurrence back in those days. There's 1,000 reasons on how you could wind up 6 feet under. When the Queen of Castile's husband passed away from the disease of the month, she was devastated. Rightfully so, that's rough. However, that being said, sometimes you gotta take that with a little grace. For days she would not leave her husband's side, even after he was a cold cadaver. Later on, that corpse would travel with her, apparently even stopping a carriage once to get out and kiss his feet. It's Weekend at Bernie's, except a lot sadder and gross. And not a charming 80s movie. Ugh. Number 3, Carlotta of Mexico. This is a new one for me, but an interesting story nonetheless. Basically, France wanted a piece of Mexico, and I mean, come on, who doesn't? It's gorgeous. Carlotta was a Belgian princess who kind of just married into the royal family and got plopped down in some chaos in Mexico. There was a war, enough political strife to make anyone involved in the Watergate scandal start to look for documents. It was messy. It wasn't a good time. It got so bad that she had to go back to Europe and basically made the call that all university students have to make after Frosh Week. Hey mom, dad, listen, yeah, I'm great. Do you think maybe you could send me some money? Yeah, I need some help. Except her phone call wasn't like that. Her phone call was more like, hey, European nobility, can you come please save my husband because he's about to get de-lifed and like stabilize the country? Thanks. Spoiled princess calling. Hi. It didn't work out in the end. He got de-lifed, she went back home, and well, she went a little crazy. Number 2, Elizabeth Bathory. Serial de-lifers, your queen has arrived. I think this one is one of the more interesting cases in history. Usually when you think of a creepy de-lifer that lurk in the night, you think of Gacy, Dahmer, you know, guys like that. It's not very often that it's a woman and or someone from before the 19th or 20th century. That's just how it goes. I'd also argue perishing and manual de-lifing was a part of life back in medieval times, so kind of hard to quantify what is and isn't a serial de-lifer or life taker. However, I think she counts. The body count is estimated to be somewhere in the hundreds, and a most peculiar rumor is that she bathed in the blood of her victims. Ooh, that's gross. Bathing in water. That checks out. Bathing in mud. You go to a spa. That checks out too. Bathing in beer. Sticky and strange, but check. I've done it. One time I did that. Bathing in blood. That's a no calzone for me, chief. While the bathing in blood thing might be false, the evidence of her crimes were not. Imagine being so spoiled you can hide bodies. Number 1, Queen Mary. Henry VIII was a big bad dude who wanted it his way. He wasn't the Burger King, although by looking at him you could tell he was packing a few of those bad boys away too. No, he was the King of England and he had many wives and was spoiled himself. So, do you think his children grew up humble and wise? Nay, kind sir and madam. Queen Mary took the throne a few years later and wasn't happy with the Protestants. Ugh, too many, she said to herself. Well, if you've heard us talk about her before, she'll probably come up again time and time again because, well, she cooked those people on a wooden stake. Over her reign, countless people felt the fires of her wrath, hence the name Bloody Mary.
Many queens enjoy what's called sovereign immunity, which essentially means they cannot commit a legal wrong and are immune from civil or criminal proceedings. Let's say, for example, the late Queen Elizabeth iron knuckles a guy in the mouth, Deadpool style, because her tea was too chilly, and it causes a visceral spray of blood and a need for orbital surgery. And let's say she committed this armed attack in front of her entire family on Christmas. What happens to the queen? Prosecutors could go after the crown as executive, but then the queen's ministers would act on her behalf and accept any punishment that was doled out for her. While this immunity extends to other British heads of state during their time in office, the queen is protected for life, since that's how long she holds her position. And she did. So what other monarchy other than the British has this criminal immunity? Belgium's constitution states the king is violable and his ministers are accountable too, as does Denmark's. And since 1848, the Dutch constitution states the king is immune from prosecution, the ministers are responsible. The constitution of Bhutan, Sri Lanka, and Sweden all have sovereign immunity, but without holding the ministers accountable. If a crime is committed, everyone just walks away scot-free. In places like Iceland, meanwhile, their queen can only be prosecuted with consent of parliament, and in India, no legal action can be taken against their leader as long as they're holding office, but you can get them impeached then sue, so that's something. Tradition number 9 is animal hoarding. I've always hated hearing people discuss how the British queen or king, whoever is on the throne, just owns all the fishes royale. So animals like whales, dolphins, sturgeons, porpoises, and even swans, thanks to a year 1300 rule. These guys are out here completely splashing around free and clear and completely unaware that they're owned by any petty human laws. However, owning a horde of pets is quite different, and Elizabeth and her corgis are nowhere near the first ruling monarch to start that tradition or build laws to protect them. Hippos were royal family animals back in ancient times of Egypt and were protected by law for centuries. Dogs, however, seem to have struck the hearts of European nobility. Mary Queen of Scots spent her life with dogs and loved them so much that she had hers legally licensed and protected, keeping them with her through her exile and imprisonment, and even her most adored lapdog was found in her petticoat just minutes after her head was chopped off. Charles II of England loved spaniels just like how Elizabeth loves corgis. In 1685, the writer John Evelyn wrote in his diary that Charles loved having a number of little spaniels follow him and lie in the bedchamber, and when the old king died there, it was surrounded by the beloved dogs. Versailles, home to the Bourbon King of France from 1682 to 1789, was filthy and attracted rats. So what did they have? Cats. Too many cats. One day, Louis XVI went to his commode, unaware that one of his Angora cats had curled up in the porcelain bowl below. And to quote, when events galvanized the cat into attacking the sovereign from below, a dazed Louis fled, stockings in hand, ringing all the bell pulls. And who could forget Josephine, the wife of Napoleon, who literally started her own private zoo. Tradition number 8 is royal baby easel. This one is locked into just British monarchy, and it's more weird than messed up. The first person to learn of a new young royal's arrival to the world must be the queen. Hands down, no debate, even if a king is in the picture. But when it's time to share the news with the world, well, out comes the ceremonial golden easel and the poster board, set up smack dab outside Buckingham Palace. When Prince Louis was born in April of 2018, it was put on the same easel that announced his father, Prince William's arrival in 1982. Historically, the notices are handwritten, but today they're typed out with the time and birth just penned in. Tradition number 7 is continuing patronage. Being a queen comes with a Bible, even if you aren't religious by any means or Christian. This was just set in stone as a tradition by the olden time of ergot-riddled bread and corporal punishment for showing your ankles. So naturally, we still have it in place today because they knew best back then. Alrighty, anyways, the act of patronage, and specifically religious patronage, was very important during the Middle Ages. It became an active area of queenship studies because it was pretty much one of the only ways that queens could exert great influence. While religious patronage included the founding of religious institutions that could signal political alliances at the same time. Margaret of France, Isabella of France, and Philippa of Hainault, for example, were all patrons of Greyfriars Church in London, but that patronage was also connected to their mutual Capetian ties, the dynasty of France. With religion often shared between countries, even at times of war, it could be used manipulatively to bring bridges of truce. Being on good terms with the church could always be beneficial to medieval queens in other ways too. For example, when Joan of England refused to pay Benegaria of Navarre the pension she was owed as the Queen Dowager and widow of Richard I, Pope Innocent III intervened on her behalf and told him to cough it up in a humble and religious way. This also earned queens consolidations as saints, even sometimes after their passing. Tradition number 6 is following blueprint. Remember Meghan having the Christmas dinner at the Windsor family with her mother and the whole awkward addressing of the getting weighed before and after eating thing? If Meghan was to follow the blueprint, she would have never stated anything about it. Rather, thank the queen for the meal and the proof that her belly is full. Now obviously it's a pretty effed tradition, and good on Meghan for not taking that crap, but following the blueprint has been so driven into monarchy, especially female monarchy, that even the public was upset with her. To follow the blueprint is to mimic the royal woman above you, especially should you be in the presence or potentially one day taking their role. Who created the blueprint of what a medieval queen should be and how she should behave? Not any one person. Ancient Egypt felt a queen should be a certain way. Ancient Rome that a queen should stay silent. Ancient Mesoamerica, a queen was equivalent to a king and did whatever he did. It varies per culture, and thus every monarchy system created its own blueprint. Within this, there was literature specifically aimed at princesses and queens within their applicable regions. For instance, Joan I of Navarre's confessor, Durand de Champagne, wrote a text named Mirror for Ladies, which advised Joan on how to be a good queen to her husband, Philip of France, in the bedroom. In China, biographies of ancient queens provided examples of rulers whose behavior was to be modeled, as well as those deemed to be a bad influence, aka your do's and don'ts book. Italian-French author Christine de Pizan's book, The Treasure of the City of Ladies, dedicated to Margaret of Burgundy, also aimed to instruct women of all classes on how to present themselves. Tradition number 5 is dress code. Inevitably within the blueprint will be the dressing guidelines. While they have become lax in recent years for most kingdoms, kingdoms and women are able to have more control on their garb and no longer have to wear 30 unnecessary layers, they still have certain restrictions. For example, there's endless tabloid attention paid to the Spanish royals for their level of chic. Queen Letizia has openly broken dress code several times. In 2015, when delivering the flag to the 11th National Teach Zone of the Civil Guard, she broke the mandatory dress code of wearing all black and a Spanish mantilla in favor of a short and incredibly stylish white ensemble. It also violated tradition by being an outfit repeat. She wore the same white getup to her husband's proclamation as king. I can't talk about dress code violation without mentioning our baby girl Princess Diana, who had the stuffy Brits flying out of their knee-high tube socks over her sweaters and bike shorts. Meghan was also highly criticized in recent years for challenging dress code, which is prudish and bland at best in England. You aren't allowed bright nail polish, and the now deceased queen forbid ladies from trousers at social events, and you had to own those big stupid hats. Tradition number 4 is pretty pressure. Essentially, queens were expected to be the ultimate good woman, a model of virtuous behavior. They were expected to be good wives and mothers as well as good rulers, but they were also meant to be pious peacemakers and to look pretty, but not so pretty you don't want to respect them, but also still pretty enough you want to pay attention. Think about that Barbie monologue. That naturally comes with the endless critique. Beauty was obviously a huge part of a queen's role, and they were expected to represent contemporary ideals. William Caxton, in his 15th century book, The Game and Play of Chess, states that the queen ought to be a fair lady, sitting in their chair and crowned with a corone on her head and clad with cloth of gold. She should also, he writes, take care to be chaste, wise, of honest life, and well-mannered. It's interesting that beauty is the very first quality that Caxton names in his text, and we can see this in other sources of medieval eras, such as the Welsh Triads, or the 13th century Las Diet Patridias Kingdom Law book, where it's written that the qualities that kings should look for in a bride is the more beautiful the queen is, the more the king will love her, and the more handsome their children will be. No mention of being a good political leader. So it's really interesting again, seeing how these ideals of queenship tied together. Alfonso was basically equating the idea that a beautiful woman will make a good wife and a good mother, which takes us back full circle to those expectations of medieval queens to be everything. Tradition number 3 is tax exemption. This one sucks. Imagine you happen to be born in random luck of the draw bloodline and just don't have to pay taxes. Quite a few countries had laws in regards to their leaders, be it king or queen, being exempt from tax. Queen Elizabeth wasn't required, and now neither is Charles. However, Elizabeth had been voluntarily paying income and capital gain taxes since 1992. Her grandsons are also paying their taxes but do not have to. King Juan Carlos, Spain's former monarch, has paid about $820,000 in back taxes amid an investigation by prosecutors into whether he and other royal members of the royal family used bank accounts in other people's names to hide assets from tax authorities. The payment announcement came just a month after the Spanish media revealed an investigation into possible tax evasion, and that occurred after Juan abdicated in 2014 and was no longer shielded by immunity from prosecution. The extent of that immunity has become an issue in previous corruption cases, but it remains an unsettled question. The Belgian royal family no longer holds any power, but receives large payments for their advisements and roles as, not to be rude, figureheads. These payments are always taxed, as are the family. Dutch royals are among the monarchies exempt from paying income tax still. Last year, the Prime Minister Mark Rutte rejected opposition demands to scrap the exemption. His government proposed an annual royal budget of £50.2 million for 2023, untaxed. Tradition number 2 is no ID needed. Royal prerogative is a special exemption statute from certain statute laws. England is famous for allowing its queen or king the right to no driver's license, no upholding of speed limits, and traveling without needing of a passport. That means even though Queen Elizabeth preferred to stick to driving on her private estates, she could technically go speeding around London and running red lights if she wanted to. Japan's Emperor Naruhito and Empress Masako are also exempt, as stated in a ministry document dated for May 10th of 1971. Apparently, it would be highly inappropriate to issue a passport to the emperor or empress. The document also stated that it will be highly inappropriate for the emperor to undergo immigration or visa procedures using a passport as an ordinary citizen. The Dutch head of state, similar to Elizabeth, does not require a passport for the reason that all passports in his country are technically issued by him. So it'd be funny for the king to have a passport where he himself has to ask for permission to allow himself into another country. Tradition number 1 is 2 birthdays. The 2 birthday tradition for British monarch dates back to 1748 when King George II combined the annual summer military march with his birthday celebration, which should have been during the winter, as to quote, with a November birthday being too cold for celebratory parades, he tied his celebration in with the annual Trooping of the Color military parade. Trooping the Color, a military parade, has its origins on the battlefield. A regime flag or colors was a key rallying point for soldiers during battle, so obviously you got recognized around flag. To ensure soldiers would recognize it, the flag was marched around, aka trooped, for the ranks to see. A regiment's colors came to have huge significance for serving soldiers, and the gain or loss of colors were seen as decisive moments in battle. Nowadays, since it also doubles as a birthday party where the kid invited his whole class, the marching of troops is a spectacular and boring display of 1,400 parading soldiers, 400 horses, and 400 musicians. The monarch arrives at the beginning, looks over the troop, the band performs, the bagpipe guys proceed to make an obtrusive wall of noise, and then they all start marching. The royal carriage follows along.